Chapter 347. The little girl felt that she had been neglected recently. In order to prevent her from having such thoughts, Xianxia brought her around Hohai. After playing with her for a while, the family of three slowly strolled back to the tea house. Her mother had become a patient, and the little girl was very concerned about it. So when she returned to the tea house, she didn't even have time to say hello to the brothers before she ran into the bar. She raised her head and asked Xiao Yuan to pour her a cup of hot water. The little girl eagerly brought the hot water to Qin Ruing. No matter what, she wanted Qin Ruing to take the medicine first. Qin Ruing had never been to the hospital, so how could she have any medicine on her? So she could only tell the little girl that it didn't matter and that she would be fine after a few days of rest. But the little girl didn't listen to anything she said. Because in the little girl's mind, she must take medicine when she was sick. Only by taking medicine can she be cured. This was also the idea that Aunt Zhang had instilled in her since she was young. It was to prevent her from being unwilling to take medicine when she was sick in the future. He didn't expect that after leaving Aunt Zhang for so long, the little girl could still remember this. This made Xianxia feel gratified. It was rare for her daughter to be so filial, so Qin Ruing naturally couldn't discourage her. So after hesitating for a while, she took a Peiyuan pill from Xianxia and pretended to take it. Seeing this, the little girl finally felt relieved. Then, as usual, she got together with the brothers and continued to play games. For a child, being happy was the most important thing. As long as she was happy every day, this childhood was worth remembering. Time flew by, and it was almost summer vacation. According to the couple's plan, after this summer vacation, the little girl would have to go to a senior class. The school would definitely be the top school, but it wasn't to force the little girl to be a top student. It was to give her a change of environment so that she could be in contact with more children of the same age. On the other hand, it was also because these three little things had been playing too much recently. If they were left alone, it wouldn't be long before they would fumble around playing Mobile Legends. Playing games was addictive. Children had poor self-control, so it was better to play less. School was obviously the best place to go to rehab. After the start of summer, Hohai became lively again. Enjoying the cool air was different from enjoying the air conditioning, so after Xiao Yuan opened the door, she moved out a few sets of tables and chairs so that the guests could drink tea under the shade of a tree and enjoy the beautiful scenery of the lakeside. It had to be said that Xiao Yuan was indeed very competent as a shopkeeper. The little girl was well-behaved and had a sweet tongue. With her efforts during this period of time, she had indeed brought in many regular customers for the tea house. Although they were still in a state of loss, it was much better than before when they couldn't make ends meet. Seeing that the weather was gradually improving, Xiao Yuan bought a string of wind chimes from the internet and hung them on the door curtain. Every time the wind blew, a crisp and melodious ringing sound could be heard. It had a unique charm to it. The small tea house was still the same small tea house, but it was more lively than before. Perhaps it was an illusion, but Xianxia felt that his current life was like a tranquil lake. It was calm on the surface, but undercurrents were surging. He liked his current stable and ordinary life, so he didn't want to see any changes. Qin Ruing's illness was an unknown variable to Xianxia. It had to be said that his sister-in-law came back at the right time. Qin Xueqing was also a Xiannu. When Xianxia asked her if she had the same feelings, Qin Xueqing immediately gave an affirmative answer. But there was something strange. Qin Xueqing's symptoms weren't very obvious. Sometimes, the symptoms would disappear without anyone noticing. Xianxia couldn't help but suspect that it was because the time it took for the soul to return to the body was too short, and Qin Ruing's cultivation was too low, so there was a normal rejection reaction. But no matter what, as long as a person felt any discomfort, it must be a warning from the body. Therefore, he still had to treat it with caution and pay more attention to it. How to observe? Of course, he had to stay by Qin Ruing's side all day. Therefore, the person playing chess with Gu Lao now became Qin Ruing. Although Qin Ruing's chess skills weren't that good, she relied on Xianxia's pointers to barely be able to play chess with the old man. Wasn't this the same as slaying Gu Lao's dragon? The three people chatted while playing chess, when the wind chime at the door suddenly rang. Ring, ring, ring. The sound of the wind chime was crisp and pleasing to the ear. Qin Ruing subconsciously turned her head to look, and was immediately shocked and stood up. "Dad, why are you here?" The person who came was Qin Yongyan. He was wearing a white traditional training suit today. This kind of outfit was particularly eye-catching in Hohai, which was famous for its bars. Qin Ruing smiled and went forward to greet Qin Yongyan. Xianxia also stood up and greeted, "Dad." But as soon as the voice fell, Xianxia slightly frowned. Something seemed wrong. Qin Ruing didn't notice the strangeness. After introducing Qin Yongyan to Gu Lao, she pulled Qin Yongyan to sit on the side and talked. "Dad, is this your first time here? I thought you couldn't find it. I just came back from outside. Seeing that you weren't at home, I thought I'd come here to take a look. Okay, I'll call Nyin over and let her play with you for a while." After that, Qin Ruing turned around and was ready to call the little girl over, but was stopped by Qin Yongyan with a smile. "It's okay, isn't that child playing happily? Don't disturb her." "Okay then." Although the father and daughter lived under the same roof, because Qin Yongyan was busy cultivating all day, they usually didn't even see each other face to face. Qin Yongyan rarely came to the tea house, so Qin Ruing naturally had to accompany him to have a good talk. Since the old father-in-law came, this game of chess could only be temporarily suspended. After Xianxia excused himself to Gu Lao, he went to the bar to pour a cup of tea, and then sat next to Qin Ruing. The father and daughter were chatting about daily life. After seeing Xianxia come over, Qin Yongyan smiled and said to the couple, "Today, I actually have something to tell you." Seeing this, Qin Ruing leaned forward slightly and put on a look of listening attentively. But Qin Yongyan didn't immediately speak, but looked around with a smile. Xianxia immediately understood what he meant, so he immediately set up a soundproof restriction, and then frowned and directly asked the question in his heart. "Are you injured?" From the moment Qin Yongyan entered the door, Xianxia found that his breath was not very stable, so he had this guess. Hearing this, Qin Yongyan didn't hide, nodded and explained with a smile, "I had a small misunderstanding with someone before, but it has been solved." At this time, Qin Ruing on the side finally recovered and couldn't help but exclaim, "Are you injured? Where are you injured? Is it serious?" Qin Ruing wanted to see where he was injured, but was stopped by Qin Yongyan with a smile. "Don't worry, it's just a small injury." "How can that be?" "She, quickly help Dad take a look. Don't leave any hidden dangers." Under Qin Ruing's repeated requests, Qin Yongyan had to stretch out his right hand for Xianxia to check. Then, Xianxia found that Qin Yongyan's breath was in disorder because his meridians were injured. For a celestial, this degree of injury was naturally nothing, and he would recover in 2 or 3 days. Of course, the injury was not the main point. The main point was the injured person. Qin Ruing kept asking Qin Yongyan how he was injured, but Qin Yongyan avoided this topic. After a few fruitless inquiries, Qin Ruing could only pout and sit there sulking. She was already a mother, yet she was still acting like an angry little girl. Qin Yongyan couldn't help but chuckle at her antics. "Ying, I came here today mainly to talk to you about some things about your mother. If you don't want to listen, I'll go back first." After saying that, Qin Yongyan got up and pretended to leave. Chapter 348. Looking at Qin Ruing's resentful look, Qin Yongyan had a different feeling in his heart. In the blink of an eye, Ying had grown up and had a child of her own. So fast, Qin Yongyan sorted out his thoughts. After Qin Ruing sat down quietly, he said slowly, "Ying, do you still remember when you were young, you loved to ask where your mother went?" "Of course I remember. At that time, when I saw that everyone else had a mother, I couldn't help but feel a little disappointed, so I always pestered you to ask where my mother went." As Qin Ruing spoke, she couldn't help but look sideways at the little guy. As a mother, she had the deepest understanding of this child's feelings. "It's been hard on you." Qin Yongyan sighed softly. Then he changed the topic and said calmly, "I didn't tell you before. In fact, your mother didn't die of illness. She died of old age. She didn't experience any pain. She just lay in my arms and quietly passed away." After saying that, Qin Yongyan smiled and made a hugging gesture, as if he was showing her the scene at that time. After Qin Ruing heard his words, a very surprised expression appeared on her face. She even suspected that she had heard wrongly. died of old age. Qin Ruoying's doubts didn't last long. Qin Yongyan smiled and explained to himself, yes, died of old age. Your mother's health has always been very good. She passed away only because she exhausted her lifespan, but it's a pity that, the year she passed away, she had just turned 36. At this point, Qin Yongyan couldn't suppress the surging emotions in his heart. Gradually, some indescribable expressions appeared on his face. There was sadness, reluctance, longing, and at the same time, pain and regret. After knowing you, there was no one else in the world. Just like going through the sea, how could I have mercy on the rivers? The person has passed away, but the thoughts remain forever. The hearts of father and daughter were connected. Qin Yongyan's heart was filled with a myriad of thoughts. Qin Ruoying's eyes also turned red. The atmosphere suddenly became much more oppressive. Seeing this, Xianxia gently held Qin Ruoying's hand. Then, he asked thoughtfully, she exhausted her lifespan at 36 years old. Is there any secret behind this? Hearing this, Qin Yongyan immediately nodded and replied, I came to you today for this matter. Actually, Yingying's mother, she used to be Xian Nu. After hearing the two words, Xian Nu's eyes. Obviously, she didn't like this name. She noticed Qin Ruoying's strange behavior and gently squeezed her palm, indicating for her to relax and listen to Qin Yongyan first. Xian Nu's status in the village is very high. No matter what wish she has, everyone will try their best to fulfill it. And the reason why they receive such preferential treatment is mainly because most Xian Nu won't live past 40, so this is actually a form of compensation in disguise. After hearing Qin Yongyan's words, Qin Ruoying's face instantly turned ugly. Xianxia was already mentally prepared for this. He already knew a little about Siming Xian Nu's problem from Bai Hong. Fortunately, he had already found Yingying's earth soul, so she shouldn't be like her mother, who had already passed away when she was still young. However, although her earth soul was found, Qin Ruoying still had symptoms of dizziness recently. This made Xianxia very anxious. After all, Bai Hong's knowledge was limited, so he couldn't be sure if Qin Ruoying still had any hidden dangers. Qin Yongyan suddenly mentioned Xian Nu, so he must know something. Therefore, Xianxia immediately asked, is there any solution? Hearing this, Qin Yongyan shook his head and couldn't help but sigh. I don't know either. Xian Nu of All Saints Valley has a short lifespan since ancient times. Everyone is already used to this. No solution? Not really. Seeing Xianxia's anxious expression, Qin Yongyan couldn't help but feel happy for his daughter. With such a husband, what more could a woman ask for? However, now wasn't the time to talk about this, so after a slight pause, he continued, Xian Nu of All Saints Valley has a short lifespan, but there's a place where Xian Nu is an exception. What place? Daiyu Island. Then, Qin Yongyan told Xianxia all the information he knew. Siming Xian Nu came from the land of legacy. In this world, there was more than one land of legacy. Floating Mist Mountain, Daiyu Island, All Saints Valley, Misty Pavilion, and the Wind Listening and Rain Observing Building. This mountain, island, valley, palace, and building were the 5 great land of legacy left behind by the ancient cultivators. Most of the cultivation legacies circulating in the world now came from these 5 places. Among them, Floating Mist Mountain had disappeared for a long time, and it was hard to find any trace of it. The Misty Pavilion and the Wind Listening and Rain Observing buildings still existed, but there had been internal strife in these 2 places, which led to the loss of their legacies. They might not be able to provide any effective help. Therefore, the only place with the most complete legacies was Daiyu Island, which had always been closed to the outside world. In fact, these things weren't much of a secret. Anyone above the peak strength stage would know something about it. Perhaps only hidden experts, like Xianxia, who would rather deal with aunties in the wet market than communicate with cultivators, knew nothing about these things. Of course, the legacies of Daiyu Island weren't the main point. The main point was, their Xian Nu had a long lifespan. This was definitely not a coincidence. There must be a way to prevent Xian Nu's lifespan from being shortened in Daiyu Island. East Sea Immortal Mountain, Daiyu Island? Xianxia repeated this sentence, then suddenly thought of something. After looking at Qin Yongyan thoughtfully, he asked, "You went to Daiyu Island the day before yesterday, right?" But without waiting for Qin Yongyan to reply, Qin continued, minding her own business. "In other words, the injuries on your body are related to the people on this island?" Qin Yongyan naturally knew what Qin meant. However, Qin Yongyan didn't intend to take revenge, so he just shook his head with a smile and didn't respond. "Okay, I understand." Speaking of this, she suddenly turned to look at the little girl beside him, then waved at her. The little girl was quite sensible. As soon as she saw her grandfather, she directly threw the phone to the two brothers and ran over eagerly. "Grandpa, you're here." After the little girl sat in Qin Yongyan's arms for a while, she smiled and said to her, "Nyanyan, Mom and Dad are going on a long trip. Do you want to go with us? If you don't want to go, you can stay at home and accompany me. What do you think?" Hearing this, the little girl jumped up from Qin Yongyan's arms as if she had been electrocuted. Then she shouted at the top of her lungs, "I want to go. I'll go wherever you go. Don't leave me behind." As she spoke, the little girl felt so wrong that she was about to cry. Seeing this, she could only reach out and pinch her little face, then smiled and comforted her. "Okay, it's okay. We won't leave you behind. How could Mom and Dad bear to leave you behind? If you want to go, we'll definitely take you there." After hearing Qin's words, the little girl's mood suddenly turned for the better. She couldn't help but smile and say, "Then where are we going?" Chapter 349. For a celestial being, it was naturally not difficult to ride the wind and enter the sea. Because the little fellow had to go with them, Qianxia did not choose to fly directly to Daiyu. Instead, he took the little fellow to Zhonghai by plane and borrowed a yacht from Ningzhonggua, treating it as a sea trip. A yacht self-driving tour. This made the little fellow very happy. Once she got on the yacht, she chattered non-stop. This yacht was the one Ningzhonggua used to entertain their family of 3 last time. It had 3 floors in total, and the decorations and configuration were extremely luxurious. Naturally, there was no need to bring any attendants with them on a self-driving tour, so Qianxia dismissed the staff on the yacht. As a result, there were only the 3 of them on this huge yacht. The sea breeze curled in spirals, and the sparkling waves sparkled. No matter how bright the sun was, it did not have the slightest taste of summer heat. The little fellow knelt on the observation deck on the top floor of the yacht, her small body constantly twisting with the sway of the yacht. She chewed on the fruit she had peeled for her while looking at the distant skyline. Her little face was about to bloom with joy. Suddenly, the little fellow seemed to have thought of something. She suddenly jumped into Qin Ruing's arms, and then said very coquettishly, "Mama, the next time we go out to play, can we bring Wenwen and Mingming along? They really want to come out with me to play." Hearing this, Qin Ruing rubbed her head and responded with a smile, "Sure, the next time we go out, I'll persuade Grandpa. If he agrees, we'll bring Wenwen and Mingming along, okay?" "Okay." The little fellow laughed excitedly, her eyes full of excitement and anticipation. However, this excitement soon disappeared. When the city's skyline gradually disappeared from the sea, there was only the boundless sea and the boundless sky left. It was difficult to even see a bird. The blue sea and white clouds. On the boundless sea, there was only one yacht moving forward alone. This was a very beautiful scene, but how could a 5-year-old child know how to appreciate it? Therefore, after the excitement passed, the little guy began to feel a little bored and lay on the sofa motionless. When the last trace of patience was worn out and it raised its head to see the boundless sea, the little thing immediately flipped out. "Not fun at all. Not fun at all. I want to go back." Looking at her aggrieved face, those who didn't know better would think that she had been tricked by her parents. Qianxia, who was preparing lunch in the kitchen, heard her shout, so he quickly put down what he was doing and quickly walked to the balcony. It would have been fine if Qianxia hadn't come, but now that he had, the little thing immediately pouted and looked like it was about to burst into tears at any moment. Seeing this, Qianxia could only stride forward and pick up the little thing from the sofa. Then he patiently asked, "Nyanyan, weren't you quite happy just now? Why are you suddenly angry?" "It's not fun here. I want to go back." The little thing's naughty temperament also came out. She twisted her body and kept shouting that she wanted to go home. In fact, she couldn't be blamed for being capricious. After all, the sea couldn't be compared to the mountains. In addition to all kinds of plants in the mountains, there were countless cute animals, but what about the sea? Other than the sea, there was only the sea. The sea was magnificent, but at the same time, it was also lonely. If the voyage was long, even the most experienced crew members could suffer from psychological problems, let alone a 5-year-old child like her. Xianxia roughly calculated the coordinates given by Qin Yongyan. In fact, the journey wasn't too far. At the current sailing speed, they would probably reach Diyu Island in the evening. Although it was only a 5 to 6 hour voyage, there was no internet or cartoons on the ship. Even if she played with her phone, without the company of the two brothers, the little thing would find it boring to play alone. Therefore, Xianxia pondered for a while and once again took out his trump card, Magic Tricks. Ninian, how about this? Daddy will show you a magic trick. I guarantee that you'll find it fun. Hearing this, the little thing, who was noisy just now, suddenly quieted down. She looked at Xianxia eagerly. Needless to say, her little eyes were full of anticipation. It couldn't be helped. After all, Xianxia's magic trick was already deeply ingrained in her heart. As long as the word magic trick was mentioned, it would instantly attract the little thing's full attention. Nian watched carefully. Xianxia pretended to smile mysteriously. After pinching the little thing's nose with his hand, he gently waved his arm toward the sea. The wind was gentle and the sun was bright. The blue sea was as soft as silk. When the breeze hit, there would be a slight ripple on the surface of the sea. It was unknown what method Xianxia used, but the moment he waved his hand, the originally calm sea suddenly stirred up waves. After noticing the change in the sea, the little thing subconsciously opened her eyes wide. However, before she could regain her senses, countless fish suddenly jumped from the bottom of the sea. Like the legendary fish leaping over the Dragon Gate, countless fish continuously jumped high from the sea. After drawing a beautiful semicircle in the air, they fell heavily into the water. The little thing opened her eyes wide, trying to see the fish's appearance clearly. However, she found that the fish were red, yellow, blue, and purple. The fish kept jumping from the sea, their colorful fish scales shining brightly under the sunlight. At first glance, it was as if a rainbow bridge had been built on the surface of the sea. Because there were too many fish, they kept jumping out of the sea and then fell back into the sea. As a result, there was a splash sound on the surface of the sea. It was as if it was raining and the sound did not stop. For a moment, the whole world seemed to be lively again. The little thing was stunned. She opened her little mouth for a long time but was unable to say a word. Xianxia was very satisfied with her reaction, so he gently patted her and asked with a smile, "How is it? Do you like this magic trick?" "I like it." "Then take a look here." As he spoke, Xianxia pointed below the yacht. The little thing stretched her neck and looked down. Only then did she find that there were suddenly many white and fat figures beside the yacht. "Dolphins. It's dolphins." The little thing was excited. As a regular in children's picture books, dolphins were like stars in the eyes of the little thing, so she recognized them at a glance. The dolphins in the sea seemed to have heard her voice, so they immediately raised their heads and nodded at her. "Papa, they're saying hello to me." The little thing had never seen such a scene before. She immediately waved at the dolphins excitedly. The intelligence of dolphins was very high. The intelligence of an adult dolphin was even equivalent to that of a 6 or 7-year-old child. Chapter 350. Go up to the 9 heavens to catch the moon, go down to the 5 seas to catch turtles. The sea was lonely because people couldn't see the bustling world below. The fish built a rainbow bridge, and the dolphins nodded at her. Although the trick was simple, it allowed the little girl to see a different sea, and it also calmed her restless heart. Finally, a bright smile appeared on the little girl's face again. She stood on the side of the boat, facing the sun. Her little face was rosy, like a ripe apple, looking especially sweet and attractive. When the breeze blew the waves, the crashing sound of the waves was like the most pleasant accompaniment in the world. accompanying the boat as it gradually sailed into the distance. While Xianxia's family of 3 was busy playing with the dolphins, the distant Diyu Island was also particularly lively. Today was the Jiang clan's Memorial Day. The Jiang clansmen on each island had to come to the main island and line up according to seniority at the foot of Xianxia Peak. Under the leadership of the Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu, they followed the clan leader to worship their ancestors. After many years of reproduction and recuperation, the Jiang clan was thriving, regardless of whether it was the main branch or the side branches. If the main island was compared to a county, then the remaining 16 small islands were the towns and villages under the jurisdiction of the county. Today, the Jiang clansmen gathered on the main island of Diyu Island, as if all the people of the county had come to the county. From the dock to the top of Xianxia Peak, it was densely packed with people. Xianxia Peak wasn't high, and a bluestone road led from the top of the mountain to the nearest dock. Those who could stand on the bluestone road were the direct descendants of the Jiang clan, or the senior members of the side branches. And it was precisely because there were too many people that even the beach that would be flooded from time to time was filled with youthful juniors. On the entire island, regardless of whether they were young or old, there was a large ribbon tied around their heads, dressed in blue and black ceremonial robes, and clasped their hands in front of their chests. As long as the bell at the top of the mountain rang, everyone would bow to the top of Xianxia Peak in unison. Dong! Dong! The dull and distant sound of the bell continued to ring, startling the birds in the forest and causing them to fly into the sky. They then began to circle around the island. One person bowing might not feel much, but when thousands of people bowed at the same time, it gave off a solemn feeling. It was only when one was in the midst of it that they realized how insignificant they were. And this was the tradition of the Jiang clan. There were a total of 36 chimes. When the last chime rang out, a woman's voice suddenly resounded throughout the entire island. Now that the ceremony is over, please move to the North Island. Today's banquet will be held there. After hearing this, the solemn scene on the island was no longer as solemn as before. Everyone seemed to have been unshackled. They immediately gathered in groups of 2s and 3s, preparing to head to the North Island for dinner. But then, the woman's voice suddenly sounded again. But this time, her tone was no longer as calm and graceful as before. Instead, it became a little anxious. Wait, those of the Yuan generation and above, please wait. The patriarch has something important to discuss with all of you. Hearing this, the people on the island couldn't help but whisper to each other. Above the Yuan generation? That would mean that he was at least a grandfather. Did something big happen in the clan? Because the notice came too suddenly, no one reacted immediately. After the woman urged them again, all the Jiang clan members of the Yuan generation and above turned to climb the serene afterglow peak. On Xianxia Peak, outside the Jiang clan's ancestral hall. During the sacrificial ceremony, people had to keep a certain distance from each other. Now that the sacrificial ceremony was over, the patriarch called everyone over. Naturally, the ancestral hall square was instantly filled with people. Among the people present, the lowest seniority was the same generation as the patriarch, Jiang Yuankui. One could imagine how important the matter the patriarch was going to talk about today was. But, after everyone from the Yuan generation and above arrived at the square, everyone learned an important piece of information from the others. The person who summoned everyone was not the patriarch, but the one who had been in seclusion for many years. Many people even thought that he had died long ago, but there was no funeral. Second granduncle, Jiang Jingqing. Jiang Jingqing's seniority was extremely high. The reason why he was called second granduncle was not because he was the second son, but because he was not of the direct bloodline. The so-called direct bloodline was the descendant of the first patriarch of the Jiang clan. The general meaning was that if a father had 2 sons, the eldest son could be called a direct descendant, and the second son could only be called a collateral descendant. Then, the eldest son of the eldest son would inherit the title of direct descendant, and the second son would become a collateral descendant. And so on, in order to maintain the purity of the direct bloodline. This kind of thinking might be difficult to understand with the thinking of modern people, but for a large clan like the Jiang clan, preserving the direct bloodline was the most important thing in the clan. This was the clan's rule and also the ancestral teachings. Of course, from Xianxia's point of view, these people were actually a bunch of steely straight men who didn't understand genetics. More and more people gathered in the square. Everyone was discussing in low voices, one after another, so much so that the square was about to become a vegetable market. At this time, a woman who looked to be about 40 years old, but still had her charm intact, quickly walked out of the ancestral hall. The woman looked at the noisy crowd and immediately frowned. Silence! The woman only slightly opened her mouth, but her voice was like a thunderclap, instantly causing everyone's ears to buzz. Where is this place? How can you all be allowed to make a racket here? The woman looked around with a cold face, and wherever her gaze landed, everyone lowered their heads and listened obediently. For a moment, the whole place was so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. Seeing that no one was talking, the woman stood on the steps outside the ancestral hall, as if she was about to announce something. But just as she opened her mouth, before she could make a sound, a white figure suddenly descended from the sky and landed directly beside the huge bronze cauldron in the square. The woman instinctively wanted to scold that person, but when she saw the person's appearance, she immediately bowed and said, "Greetings to second granduncle." Hearing this, everyone looked sideways. Then, they followed the woman's example, turned around and bowed respectfully to that person, and shouted in unison, "Greetings to second granduncle." This scene was very similar to an ancient emperor going to court. After everyone finished speaking, the second granduncle, who was the center of attention, smiled and said, "Everyone, get up. I'm not the clan leader, so why are you so respectful?" "Thank you, second granduncle." After hearing the second granduncle's response, everyone straightened up and looked straight at the ancestral hall. At this time, Jiang Yuankue, who had been staying in the ancestral hall, slowly walked out of the main hall as if he had just heard the noise. Although he was the clan leader, his seniority was much lower, so he had to bow respectfully to the second granduncle like everyone else. "Greetings to second granduncle." However, although Jiang Yuankue bowed to the second granduncle did not respond to him. After the second granduncle looked at Jiang Yuankue up and down, he suddenly seemed to think of something and threw out an earth-shattering sentence. "How long have I been in seclusion? Even the clan leader has changed. Is your father dead?" Chapter 351. Is your father dead? Even a stranger wouldn't greet someone's parents like that, let alone an elder in the clan. Therefore, no matter how shrewd Jiang Yuankue was, he couldn't help but change his expression after hearing his words. No matter what, he was still the head of the clan. What was the difference between the seemingly cordial greeting from his second granduncle and slapping his face in public? He simply didn't care about his identity as the head of the clan. The atmosphere instantly became much more oppressive. The sun was still shining brightly, but it gave people the feeling that a storm was coming. On one side was the current head of the Jiang clan. On the other side was the extremely senior and powerful second granduncle. Everyone present was old and experienced. Seeing that the situation wasn't good, they immediately buried their heads and didn't even dare to breathe loudly. They were afraid that the fire at the city gate would affect them. No matter what, Jiang Yuankue was still the head of the clan. Even if he was provoked by his second granduncle, he couldn't lose his composure because of this. Therefore, after taking a deep breath, Jiang Yuankue forcibly suppressed the anger in his heart. Then, he forced a smile and said to his second granduncle, "Thank you for your concern, second granduncle. My father's health is still good. He's currently deducing the way of the celestial being with many ancestors on Heron Island." Hearing this, his second granduncle suddenly chuckled. As if he thought of something, he first shook his head. Then, as if he was talking to himself, he casually muttered, "A bunch of old farts." Although his voice was soft, everyone present wasn't a cultivator. How could this sentence escape their ears? However, everyone acted as if they didn't hear it. Even the woman who had signaled for everyone to be silent seemed to have lost her hearing. She stood in front of the ancestral hall with her head lowered and her eyes looking straight ahead. Everyone present was silent. Jiang Yuankue frowned and remained silent for a while. Finally, he raised his head and said in a slightly cold tone, "Second granduncle, You've just come out of seclusion and you're already in a hurry to call the clan meeting. May I ask if there's something you want to discuss with everyone? As he spoke, Jiang Yunkui deliberately emphasized the word old. It was probably to remind his second granduncle that he was the one who should die of old age the most on Daiyu Island. In fact, Jiang Jingqing, who was respectfully called second granduncle, was not old at all. Judging from his appearance, he didn't look like an old man at all. He looked like a young man in his early 30s who could almost be considered a youth. Over 200 years had passed, yet the old fellow had actually relied on his extraordinary cultivation to allow him to return to his youth, and he was like a sick tree that had come back to life and revealed extremely exuberant vitality once more. How could this not cause others to arouse reverence towards him? When Earth's heaven and Earth's spirit chi was so scarce, the Jiang clan's collateral branch still gave birth to such a stunning figure. It had to be said that this was the Jiang clan's fortune. However, at the same time, this was also the tragedy of the Jiang clan's direct descendants. The direct descendants of the Jiang family had the best resources on Daiyu Island, but none of them were comparable to the second granduncle. That was why Jiang Yunkui was being bullied by the second granduncle, and he could only swallow his pride and swallow his pride. Jiang Jingqing appeared to be standing on the ground, but in reality he was still several inches away from the ground. After hearing Jiang Yunkui's words, he suddenly laughed out loud. Then, he flew straight to the top of the bronze cauldron and looked down at the crowd in the square from above. Looking at the solemn hall and the useless fellows in the square, Jiang Jingqing's heart was suddenly filled with pride. He couldn't help but roar out loud. Riches and honor are like a dream, all roots are not lacking, but true faith is hard to come by, worth as much as it comes to hear the wondrous method, not as rare as the superior serious epiphyllum? Everyone thinks that the superior serious epiphyllum is a legendary item, but they don't know that on our Daiyu Island, there is a budding superior serious epiphyllum that has been nurtured for 3,000 years. When he heard the word superior serious epiphyllum, Jiang Yunkui's face immediately darkened. Seeing that second granduncle seemed to want to continue, Jiang Yunkui no longer cared about anything else. He couldn't help but shout angrily, "How dare you, second granduncle?" Hearing this, Jiang Jingqing seemed to have heard a joke and couldn't help but laugh wildly. Ha ha! His laughter was like a thunderclap, instantly resounding throughout the entire serene afterglow peak, then gradually spread out, and finally reached the ears of everyone on the island. Everyone was preparing to go to the North Island to eat when they suddenly heard such laughter, so they quickly turned back to look at serene Afterglow Peak. Many of the bolder ones even dashed madly towards serene Afterglow Peak. They had already made up their minds that even if they would be punished by the Discipline Hall, they would still go up the mountain today to watch the show. Jiang Jingqing laughed for a long time. While he was laughing, he was also releasing an invisible pressure to the surroundings. Those with lower cultivation bases in the crowd couldn't bear this pressure and directly knelt on the ground. Even Jiang Yunkui was forced to release his true qi to try to resist this pressure. Jiang Jingqing's laughter came to an abrupt end. After sweeping his gaze over the crowd, Jiang Jingqing finally set his gaze on Jiang Yunkui. Then he slowly opened his mouth and said, "When the old ancestor left, he planted this Adumbra flower and left behind a prophecy. This flower belongs to the destined person. 3,000 years have passed, and this superior serious epiphyllum has also welcomed its time to bloom." Then this old man would like to ask, who is the destined person for this superior serious epiphyllum? Is it you? Is it you? Or is it you? As he spoke, Jiang Jingqing stretched out his hand and pointed at the Jiang clan members below. When they saw this, the few people he pointed at immediately knelt on the ground and said with flattering expressions, "Second granduncle is now the most powerful person in the Jiang clan, so you must be the destined person for this superior serious epiphyllum." That's right. The Jiang clan has been passed down for more than 3,000 years, and coincidentally, second granduncle was born, so this superior serious epiphyllum finally welcomed its flowering. I believe second granduncle is the destined person for this flower. This flower is blessed by the ancestor and blessed by the heavens. Jiang Yuankui stood in front of the ancestral hall's doors and watched as these people echoed Jiang Jingqing's words. His expression was as ugly as it could be. The superior Sirius epiphyllum was a rare treasure left behind by the Jiang clan's ancestors, and there was only one of it in the world. Although he had already expected second granduncle to be interested in this superior Sirius epiphyllum, he did not expect second granduncle to be so direct. He did not even have the slightest intention of hiding it. He was just short of directly going to Heron Island and plucking this flower. He was extremely arrogant. While Jiang Yuankui was furious, a yacht passed through Daiyu Island's mountain guarding array without any hindrance and headed straight for the main island. Xianxia stood at the bow of the yacht, and after looking up at serene afterglow peak in the distance, the corners of his mouth suddenly curled into a faint smile. Chapter 352. The sunset glow was always extremely beautiful. At the end of the sea, a huge kumquat-like setting sun stood above the horizon of the evening. A thin mist held up the perfectly round reddish gold. Looking from afar, there was only this shining golden wheel left at the intersection of the sea and the sky. As the golden wheel continued to fall, the orange-red sky was gradually dyed with some indigo, blurring Daiyu Island's figure in the sunset glow. This scene was extremely similar to the beautiful artistic conception described by Bai Juyi in the Song of the Mu River. The setting sun spreads out on the water, half of the river is red, and the other half is red. Unfortunately, although the setting sun was beautiful, it always gave people a feeling of loneliness. Perhaps it was because she had been on the boat for too long. The little girl was curled up on the sofa and fiddling with her phone in boredom. When Qin Ring brought a peeled apple to her mouth, she opened her mouth lazily and slowly took a bite. Looking at the cute way her little mouth puffed up, coupled with her salted fish-like expression, this little thing was just short of hanging a sign around her neck with the words, "Nothing to live for," written on it. Suddenly, the little thing seemed to have heard something. She sat up from the sofa and leaned against the railing, stretching her neck to look around. Whoa! Looking at the Daiyu Islands that suddenly appeared in front of her, the little thing's eyes suddenly widened. Mama! An island! There's an island here! The island that suddenly appeared was like a power bank, instantly charging the little thing who had been on standby for a long time. Mama, I want to go there to play. As she spoke, the little thing couldn't wait to jump off the sofa and step up the stairs to leave the balcony. Seeing this, Qin Ring could only put down the fruit in her hand and follow her to the bow deck. Xianxia was looking at the top of Qixia Peak thoughtfully. Seeing this, the little thing timidly crept toward him. This little thing was mischievous. It wanted to scare Xianxia, but it didn't expect that its little trick had already been seen through by Xianxia. Therefore, when she came behind Xianxia and was about to open her mouth to make a sound, Xianxia reached her first and lifted her up from the ground. Ninian, you've got guts. You even dare to come and scare Daddy. Xianxia held her in his arms and shook her a few times, but it was as if he had poked the little thing's laughing acupoint. Immediately, she let out a series of giggles. After the father and daughter played around for a while, the little fellow leaned on Xianxia's shoulder, pointed to Daiyu Island, and said coquettishly, "Papa, can we go up and play?" "Of course, when the boat docks, Daddy will take you up to have some fun." After hearing Xianxia's affirmative answer, the little fellow excitedly gestured for Xianxia to put her down. Then she ran to the railing and looked at Daiyu Island in front of her. But as she looked, she realized that there was something wrong with this place. Because there were people on the island, and there were many of them. These people stood on the shore and kept pointing at the boat. As the boat approached, the surrounding scenery and the expressions on the people's faces became clearer. The little fellow was not used to the feeling of being the center of attention. When she realized that everyone was looking at her, she quickly jumped back into Xianxia's arms and shrunk her head, unwilling to show herself. Looking at the boat slowly docked at the dock of the main island, the Jiang clansmen present were very surprised. Because many of the Jiang clansmen had never seen a boat before, when they suddenly saw such a gorgeous boat, they couldn't help but surround it and start whispering to each other. It was not that there were no foreign boats on Daiyu Island, but they were still very few. So, many of the Jiang clansmen had only heard about it, but had never seen it with their own eyes. This boat, it was indeed very beautiful. Today was the Jiang clan ceremony, so most of the Jiang clansmen had come to the main island. Because this was the first time they saw a living outsider, they naturally felt like they were watching a giant panda. Outsider? How rare. After securing the boat's anchor, Xianxia carried the little fellow in one arm and held Qin Ruing in the other. Just like that, they slowly disembarked from the boat under everyone's gaze. The little fellow was afraid of strangers, so she buried her head in Xianxia's shoulder and peeked her head out from time to time to look around. Her cowering expression made her look like a frightened ostrich. After all, this was someone else's territory, so Xianxia stood at the dock and waited for a while. Then, a man who looked to be in his 30s quickly walked up to them. The man saw that Xianxia's family of 3 did not look like bad people, so he could not figure out Xianxia's background. After all, there was a large array around Daiyu Island, so outsiders could not find the location of Daiyu Island. Since these 3 people could enter the island, they must have been invited by the people on the island. Out of this consideration, the man's tone carried some politeness. He asked politely, "Today is the day of our Jiang clan ceremony. May I ask why Sir has come to the island?" Hearing that, Xianxia also replied politely, "I was invited by the clan leader to attend the banquet today. Please lead the way, sir." Invited by the clan leader? After hearing Xianxia's reply, the man could not help but be stunned for a moment. He really did not know what to do. He was not in charge of reception in the first place. The reason why he came to ask was because the Yuan generation and above had all gone to Xianxia Peak. There were not many people in the port who were older than him. A clan meeting was being held on Xianxia Peak, but this person in front of him said that he was invited by the clan leader to attend the meeting. Thinking of this, the man could not help but look troubled. Seeing this, Xianxia added with a serious expression, "I was invited by the clan leader to attend the meeting. The clan leader must have his reasons for choosing today. If Sir doesn't know much about this, please lead the way and let me meet the clan leader first." Xianxia's words were methodical, but in fact, he didn't even know the name of the Jiang clan leader, so how could he have received an invitation from the clan leader? He just casually made up a story, but he did not expect this young man to not have the slightest doubt. How fast was Xianxia's reaction? Seeing the other party's reaction, of course, he had to take advantage of the situation and fool him. He was prepared to meet the clan leader first. Anyway, he was not afraid of being kicked out. "All right, please follow me, sir." Perhaps it was because Xianxia was holding the child, so the man was not less wary of him. After thinking for a moment, he turned sideways and made a gesture of invitation. "Thank you, sir." Then, the family of 3 slowly climbed up Xianxia Peak along the stone path in the mountain under the guidance of the man. The little fellow poked her head out and kept looking at the surrounding Jiang clan members. She seemed to be very curious about their clothes, but because these people were all looking at her, she did not make a sound. The little fellow was afraid of strangers. Finally, the man led Xianxia's family to the top of the mountain. After the family of 3 came to the edge of the square, the little fellow noticed that the atmosphere in this place seemed to be a bit wrong, so she raised her head curiously and began to look around. But when she put her eyes on the center of the square, her little red mouth immediately opened into an O shape. Chapter 353. That person was flying in the sky. The crisp and melodious child's voice also carried a kind of surprise and curiosity. But the moment this sentence sounded, it was no less than throwing a grenade in everyone's ears. With a bang sound, everyone present was shocked. Everyone couldn't help but look back. When they saw the little guy who suddenly made the noise, their eyes showed a bit of a blank look. Where did this child come from? This scene was very similar to a middle school class, when the teacher was leading everyone to recite classical Chinese. The whole class was reading excitedly, but there was an untactful student who rushed into the classroom with a piece of bread in his mouth, directly interrupting everyone's recitation. When everyone stopped to watch a good show, they shockingly discovered that this student who was late was not in their class at all. The students were dumbfounded. What kind of experience would it be to be a teacher? If Jiang Jingqing was the teacher, then Xianxia's family was naturally the late students. The Jiang clan attached great importance to the ancestral rules. Not to mention that the Qixia Peak was holding a clan meeting. Even in normal times, the ancestral square was not a place where just anyone could come. The man who led the way was still too young. When he saw that the atmosphere in the square was a bit strange, he froze in place and didn't know what to do. What else could he do? Interrupting the clan meeting caused all the elders to look back at him. Could it be that he had to brace himself and bring the outsider to the clan leader at this time? He really didn't have the guts. Seeing the man standing there in a daze, an old man next to him couldn't help but scold him in a low voice. "Fengla, what are you doing? Hurry up and take him away." Hearing this, the man named Jiang Fengla suddenly realized what was going on. He hurriedly bowed in the direction of Jiang Yuankue, and then tried to pull Xianxia away in a fluster. But how could Xianxia be so easy to get close to? Jiang Fengla just stretched out his hand, but it was as if he touched an air wall. No matter how hard he tried, his hand couldn't move forward an inch. Seeing this, Jiang Fengla couldn't help but be anxious. He couldn't help but roar in a low voice, "Hey, what are you doing? Come with me and get out of here." Jiang Fengla was so anxious that he was sweating, but Xianxia turned a deaf ear to this. He raised his head and glanced at Jiang Jingqing, who was in midair. Then he held the little girl in one hand and Qin Ring in the other and slowly walked to the center of the square as if he was taking a stroll. "I'm really sorry to have disturbed you all. If I had known that you were having a meeting, I would have waited at the foot of the mountain for a while. But since I'm already here, it's not like I can go back now. Why don't you all take a break first and continue the discussion later?" As they walked, Xianxia kept nodding to the Jiang clan members on both sides. He seemed to be walking very slowly, but in fact, in just a few words, he had passed through the huge square and arrived at the steps outside the ancestral hall. Towards the stranger who had suddenly appeared, Jiang Yuankue was also very puzzled. He glanced at Jiang Jingqing's expression from the corner of his eye, only to find that Jiang Jingqing didn't seem to recognize this person either. This was strange. Second great-uncle had cornered everyone and tried to force him to hand over the Adumbra flower. This was the most critical moment, so why would a stranger suddenly appear? Moreover, this person seemed to have brought his wife and child with him. What was he trying to do? Jiang Yuankue frowned and didn't say anything. The whole place was silent. Even Jiang Jingqing, who was in the sky, couldn't help but look down at Xianxia. Under such a situation where everyone was watching, the little girl in Xianxia's arms suddenly made a sound. They saw that she was leaning on Xianxia's shoulder and looking up at Jiang Jingqing for a while. In the end, she couldn't help but ask in a low voice, "Papa, why can he fly?" Her voice was very soft, but it reached everyone's ears without missing a word. "That uncle is fixing the electric pole. In fact, he has a rope hanging on his back. Because it's too far away, you can't see the rope, so you think he's flying?" "Oh, I know. Because it's too far away, the things I see are very, very small. So small that I can't see them." Xianxia smiled and pinched the tip of her nose, and then explained in a low voice. After understanding the reason, the little girl couldn't help but grin. However, she had just laughed a few times when she suddenly saw the woman on the steps give her a fierce glare. There was undisguised disgust and disgust in the woman's eyes. The little girl, who had never been glared at like this, was a little scared on the spot. So, the little girl suddenly shrank back into Xianxia's arms like a frightened quail and didn't dare to show her head again. Seeing the father and daughter whispering as if there was no one else around, the woman on the steps couldn't bear it anymore, so she stepped forward and scolded Xianxia harshly, "How dare you? This is the forbidden area of the Jiang clan's ancestral temple. How can an outsider be trespassed? Why aren't you taking him away?" With the woman's order, many clansmen of the Jiang clan belonging to the commandment hall immediately rushed out of the ancestral temple, showing that they were going to take down Xianxia and his family. But at this time, Xianxia suddenly turned his head and looked around. After confirming that Jiang Yuankue was the person with the highest status, he looked at him and asked calmly, "May I ask if you are the current clan leader of the Jiang clan?" Jiang Yuankue's face was cold, and he didn't answer. Xianxia reached out and touched the back of the little girl's head. After letting the little girl lean on his shoulder, he said lightly, I came uninvited today mainly to ask for an explanation from you. Ask for an explanation? As soon as he said this, Jiang Yuankui reached out and stopped the crowd. He frowned and asked, "What explanation?" "A few days ago, someone came to your island to ask for advice about the Ming Xiannu. May I ask if clan leader Jiang has any impression of this?" After hearing this, Jiang Yuankui's heart suddenly thumped, and there was a subtle change in the way he looked at Qin Shi. The person in front of him? Could it be the legendary Mr. Qin? So young. But why did he choose to come to the island today? It was too sudden. Jiang Yuankui was shocked and doubtful. He really couldn't figure out Qin Shi's identity, but he still pretended to be calm and didn't show any abnormalities. After sneaking a glance at Jiang Jingqing in the sky, Jiang Yuankui suddenly had some thoughts in his mind. So, after a light cough, he looked at Qin Shi and said in a low voice, "There is indeed such a thing. I'm very sorry that I can't answer his questions, but you have to understand that the Jiang clan only accepted outsiders out of friendship and definitely not out of duty. If you blame me because of this, isn't it a bit unreasonable?" Jiang Yuankui put on a righteous look. It seemed that he really wanted to reason with Qin Shi. However, after hearing this, Qin Shi couldn't help but laugh. He then replied coldly, "Whether I help you or not, I naturally won't blame you because of this. But do you know, that person is my father-in-law?" Hearing this, even with Jiang Yuankui's shrewdness, he couldn't help but narrow his eyes slightly. "It's really him." After confirming Qin Shi's identity, Jiang Yuankui was suddenly happy and almost laughed out loud. There was an old saying, "It's better to come at the right time than to come early." He didn't think that such a good thing would actually happen to him. There would be a good show to watch in a while. Jiang Yuankui resisted the urge to laugh in his heart. He was like an old fox that had become a spirit, standing on the stairs, only his tail was not exposed. Qin Shi felt that something was wrong with him, but didn't think too much about it. So, he continued to say, "Mr. Father-in-law came here from Shangjing with a heart full of sincerity just to ask the Jiang clan to answer his questions. But not only did you not help, you even hurt him. Then, why don't you tell me?" Chapter 354. Ask for an explanation. Who is this guy? He's so arrogant, isn't he afraid of biting his tongue? As soon as Qin Shi finished speaking, everyone couldn't help but start whispering to each other. At this time, Jiang Jingqing, who had been flying in the air, suddenly seemed to have thought of something. He instantly descended from the sky and appeared in front of Qin Shi. Jiang Jingqing frowned and looked at Qin Shi, then suddenly asked, "You're the so-called Mr. Qin?" Hearing this, Qin Shi looked at him up and down, then slowly replied, "I don't know who the Mr. Qin you're talking about is, but my surname is Qin." After hearing this answer, Jiang Jingqing suddenly felt like he had discovered a new continent. He couldn't help but nod and chuckle. Interesting." Jiang Jingqing put on a look of interest. But what he didn't expect was, Qin Shi didn't have any intention of paying attention to him. Seeing that Jiang Jingqing was blocking his line of sight, Qin Shi slightly tilted his head, walked past Jiang Jingqing, and said to Jiang Yuankui, who was on the stairs, "Leader Jiang, I'll be honest with you. If you don't give me an explanation today, then I'll have to give you one." His tone sounded very casual, like he was chatting with a friend. There was no aggression in his tone. However, the meaning behind his words was a little aggressive, and there was a feeling of being unforgiving when he was in the right. But, as the leader of the Jiang family, Jiang Yuankui didn't immediately respond after being questioned by Qin Shi in such a rude manner. This was because he knew that with his second granduncle's arrogant personality, he would definitely jump out to take the blame. As expected, the result was just as Jiang Yuankui expected. As soon as Qin Shi finished speaking, Jiang Jingqing, who was already annoyed at being ignored, immediately snorted and said coldly, I want to know, what kind of explanation are you going to give me?" After hearing this, Qin Shi finally saw Jiang Jingqing. After slowly shifting his gaze from Jiang Yuankui to Jiang Jingqing, Qin Shi frowned and said, "It's you." Hearing this, Jiang Jingqing laughed out loud as if he had heard a joke. Even though Daiyu Island is isolated, it's very well informed. Mr. Qin rose like a comet. In just a year, his reputation has spread throughout Wuxia and even the entire cultivation world. A few days ago, Mr. Chen cut down Su Feng of the Dark Ghost sect in front of countless people at the peak of Taiheng. Such a miraculous skill, how is it different from the land immortals? There are rumors that Wu Lian even wanted to give the long-vacant chief seat to Mr. Chen, but he was rejected by Mr. Chen. At this point, Jiang Jingqing looked at the little guy in Qinshi's arms with a faint smile, then continued, "This old man has lived for hundreds of years, and this is the first time I've seen such an amazing person. Naturally, I can't help but yearn for it. Today, I've seen it for myself. This old man suddenly understands what it means by seeing is believing. I don't think anyone would believe that the famous Mr. Chen is actually a midwife who doesn't forget to carry his child wherever he goes. Haha." By the end of his sentence, Jiang Jingqing was already out of breath from laughing, as if the words Mr. Chen were the biggest joke in the world. The term midwife had to be mentioned here. The midwife system was a special product of a matriarchal society. Not only did it exist in Wuxia, but even the Indians living in the Amazon River once had such a custom. The so-called midwife system was that during a woman's childbirth, a man would be on the side to simulate the wife's childbirth, and after the wife gave birth, he would replace the wife to go through confinement. The real pregnant woman had to go out to work after giving birth to the child, and she also had to take care of the husband who was in confinement. This was because, when human civilization was just born, women were the masters, and men had to obey women. Later, as the status of men gradually increased, the entire social system began to change from a matriarchal society to a patriarchal society. Men wanted to replace women in everything, including the ability to give birth to children. That was why the midwife system was created. It was just to prove that men could do everything that women could do, and they could even do it better. From today's perspective, this kind of behavior was indeed absurd. But from a historical perspective, men trying to replace women to give birth to children was actually a symbol of the progress of human civilization. The replacement of the matriarchal system by the patriarchal system was a major advancement in the history of human civilization. In summary, Jiang Jingqing was actually beating around the bush to humiliate Qianxia. The Jiang family members present naturally understood Jiang Jingqing's words. They did not have a good impression of this outsider who had suddenly appeared. Seeing that their second granduncle had expressed his opinion, of course, they had to agree with him and humiliate him as if they were looking at a monkey. Therefore, there was a burst of enthusiastic laughter in the square. Looking at their exaggerated expressions, it seemed that they were competing to see who could laugh louder. Jiang Yunkui stood on the steps and silently scanned the crowd. He did not laugh, and he did not dare to laugh. In fact, Qin Yongyan was indeed injured by his second granduncle. But, if he had not played a trick, how would Jiang Jingqing, who had just come out of seclusion, know that Mr. Chen's father-in-law had come to Daiyu Island? As the head of the family, Jiang Yuankui's cultivation was far inferior to Jiang Jingqing's. But in other aspects, even 10 Jiang Zenkings could not compare to 1 Jiang Yuankui. Jiang Jingqing had used the Jiang family's secret method to survive for hundreds of years. It was only recently that he found a glimmer of hope due to the revival of spirit qi. To this amazingly talented second granduncle, a cultivator like Mr. Chen who had appeared out of nowhere was nothing. The old man had been silent for a long time and needed to use a heavy drum to announce his name to the outside world. As for Mr. Chen, it was obviously a heavy drum of excellent quality. As long as this drum was beaten, Jiang Jingqing's name would be known throughout the cultivation world from then on. His name would be known throughout the world like thunder. Although the timing of Qinshi's appearance was somewhat unexpected, everything was still within Jiang Jingqing's control. The only thing that made him a little uneasy was Mr. Chen a match for his second granduncle? Although Su Feng had broken through to the diviner level, in Jiang Yuankui's eyes, Su Feng did not deserve the title of being above the diviner level because of the dark ghost sect's inferior inheritance. Presumably, Jiang Jingqing thought so as well. Therefore, Jiang Yuankui did not even hope that Qinshi could hurt Jiang Jingqing at all. He only hoped that Qinshi could last 100 rounds against Jiang Jingqing. Only in this way could his plan continue to be carried out, Jiang Yuankui silently calculated in his mind. But unfortunately, in the end he had miscalculated one thing. Xianxia was not only an outsider, but also a mudslide. A mudslide powerful enough to flatten Daiyu Island. Old bastard. Although Xianxia did not think there was anything wrong with a man taking care of a child, Jiang Jingqing's attitude had successfully provoked his anger. Therefore, after coldly spitting out these 3 words, Xianxia suddenly raised his right hand, and then he used his fingers as a sword and pointed to the sky. At the foot of Xianxia Peak, many of the Jiang family's juniors who had never seen a yacht before were crowding the dock to watch. Suddenly, a green light shot out from the yacht. Like lightning, in the blink of an eye, this green light had flown to the top of Rosy Dawn Peak. Then, a voice that sounded like the whispers of a deity suddenly rang out and spread to every corner of the island in an instant. Chapter 355. The yacht was right below Xianxia Peak. When the green light shot out of the yacht, it almost instantly reached the peak of Xianxia Peak. Jiang Jingqing was standing about 4 or 5 meters away from Xianxia. Seeing that Xianxia had suddenly turned hostile and attacked, a half-smile suddenly appeared on his face. For someone as arrogant as Jiang Jingqing, the only reason he didn't attack Xianxia directly was that he wanted to retreat in order to advance. After all, Daiyu Island was the territory of the Jiang clan. If he directly attacked Xianxia, an outsider, even if he won in the end, others would think that he was bullying Xianxia by outnumbering him and had an unfair advantage. But if Xianxia made the first move and forced him to fight back, who would dare to say half a word of gossip? As long as he defeated Mr. Qin fair and square, he, Jiang Jingqing, would be the undisputed #1 person in the world, enough to become the chief of the Wu Lian clan. It had to be said that Jiang Jingqing's idea was very good. As far as Jiang Jingqing knew, cultivators would more or less have some way to hide their aura. Just like in martial arts novels, the lighter one's footsteps were, the higher one's martial arts skills were. Because everything a cultivator owned came from the spiritual qi of heaven and earth, to estimate a person's true cultivation level, one only needed to look at the fluctuation of spiritual qi around the person. When a cultivator stood still, their aura hiding technique could cover most of the fluctuation of spiritual qi. So even if Xianxia didn't have any fluctuation of spiritual qi, Jiang Jingqing didn't find it strange at all. But when the green light streaked across the sky like a bolt of lightning, Jiang Jingqing suddenly realized that he might have thought too simply of the situation. The green light was only 3 feet long, but in the process of flying, it was like a meteor streaking across the sky, leaving behind a slender green thread in the dusk sky. What's that? The appearance of the green light immediately attracted everyone's attention. Immediately after, a sentence suddenly popped up in the minds of many well-informed Jiang clan clansmen. The peak of Taiheng, flying immortal with 1 sword. A flying sword? This man is really Mr. Qin. Before the crowd had time to be surprised, the green light was like a bolt of lightning, striking down on Jiang Jingqing, who was in the middle of the square. In the process of chopping down, an extremely surging wave of spirit qi suddenly erupted from the green light. Then, with the green light as the tip of the cone, a cone-shaped aura field visible to the naked eye instantly formed. However, in an instant, the green light was like a huge drill, smashing down with an unstoppable momentum. After feeling the huge amount of energy contained in the green light, Jiang Jingqing's expression couldn't help but change slightly. He no longer looked as arrogant as before. He had really been careless this time. Seeing the ferocious green light, Jiang Jingqing could only quickly raise his arms in an attempt to block the sword. Therefore, just as the green light was about to hit Jiang Jingqing, a dazzling golden light immediately appeared around him. The 6 trigram lines calming mind, embracing the yuan and guarding one. From afar, Jiang Jingqing looked like he was trapped in a golden egg. As for the green light, it was like a high-speed rotating drill bit that directly crashed into the shell of the egg. Bang! As soon as the two came into contact, an extremely dazzling light lit up the top of Xianxia Peak. The light was so bright that it almost lit up half of the sky. The collision of the moves set off an intense turbulence, so much so that a cyclone of energy suddenly appeared in the middle of the square. The cyclone spun wildly, and the strong traction force shattered everything around it. It uprooted the square's floor and the surrounding trees, and then lifted them all into the sky. Facing such a powerful wave of energy, even Jiang Yuankui had no choice but to quickly retreat into the ancestral hall, not to mention the other Jiang clansmen present. Among them, the weaker ones were almost instantly lifted into the sky by this cyclone, and then heavily smashed to the foot of the mountain. If it weren't for the protection of the Jiang clan's ancestral hall, it would probably be turned into ruins in this storm. Finally, the storm gradually subsided. Although it was still a scene of flying sand and rolling stones, and the sky was dark, some things could still be vaguely seen. Jiang Yuankui hid in the ancestral hall. At this moment, there was only one thought left in his mind. It's over. Just from the momentum of this sword, Jiang Yuankui realized that he and Jiang Yuankui might have been wrong. This Mr. Chen in front of him was definitely not a soft persimmon, and it was even more impossible for him to become a stepping stone for the Jiang clan. One had to know that no matter how he and Jiang Jingqing fought, they were both clan relatives with the same blood flowing in their bodies, so no matter who won or lost, it was acceptable for the entire Jiang clan. But if Jiang Jingqing was killed by Mr. Chen today, the fall of a heavenly man was unacceptable for Jiang Yuankui and even the entire Jiang clan. Therefore, after coming back to his senses, Jiang Yulei almost instantly rushed out of the ancestral hall, and then shouted toward the square, "Stop! It's all a misunderstanding. Please stop, both of you. Let's talk nicely," Jiang Yunkui roared at the top of his lungs. He was really afraid that the two of them would really fight to the death, and if they really had to fight to the death, how would he end it then? However, when the energy dissipated and the dust settled, Jiang Yunkui suddenly realized Jiang Jingqing was actually still flying around the square. As for that green light, it was like a cat playing with a mouse, hanging behind Jiang Jingqing at a distance, and from time to time, it would stick to Jiang Jingqing to scare him. What was going on? Jiang Yuankui was stunned by what was happening in front of him. The reality was not what he thought at all. How was this a lose-lose situation? Looking at the situation, it seemed that second granduncle was beaten up unilaterally. In fact, before Qianxia made his move, he had already set up a small illusion array around himself, so what the little fellow saw was different from what others saw. In the little fellow's eyes, the square was still the square, and the strange uncle was still the strange uncle. However, the strange uncle in front of her was like a swing, constantly floating around in the air. Seeing this, the little fellow could not help but ask in confusion, "Papa, what is that uncle doing?" "Oh, look, that uncle violated the rules when he was fixing the electric pole, causing the rope at one end to loosen, so he can't maintain his balance in the air and can only swing around in the air." "Nian Nian, don't think that this is fun. Think about it, this is such a high place. What if he accidentally falls? Would he be like Zhu Zi and turn into a pile of mud? So, don't climb so high in the future, it's very dangerous. Do you understand?" As Qianxia controlled the green light to chase after Jiang Jingqing, he did not forget to educate the little fellow. The little fellow originally thought that swinging in the air was very interesting, but after hearing Qianxia's vivid description, a nervous expression appeared on her little face. She quickly shook her head and muttered, "I know. I don't want to climb so high." "Good girl." Qianxia smiled and rubbed the little fellow's head, then looked at Jiang Yuankui. After looking Jiang Yuankui up and down, he suddenly laughed. "Misunderstanding?" Hearing this, Jiang Yuankui immediately nodded like he was pounding garlic and hurriedly replied, "Yes, yes, yes, Mr. Chen, this is all a misunderstanding. Please be magnanimous." "All right, if you say it's a misunderstanding, then it's a misunderstanding." Before Jiang Yuankui could finish his sentence, Qianxia directly interrupted him. However, right after that, Qianxia looked thoughtfully at Jiang Jingqing, who was being chased by the green light, and then suddenly asked, "Leader Jiang, Daiyu Island is so remote, I wonder if you've seen a movie?" "Movie? What movie?" "Young and Dangerous." Jiang Yuankui was stunned for a moment, completely unable to understand what Qianxia was talking about. Seeing his confused look, Qianxia did not keep him in suspense and directly explained with a smile, "There's a line in Young and Dangerous that I really like. You have to keep your word when you're out there. If I said that I'm going to kill your whole family, then I must kill your whole family. Since I said that I'm going to send him on his way, I naturally can't go back on my words, don't you think so? As soon as he finished speaking. Chapter 356. Jiang Jingqing took Xianxia's sword head-on, and his protective shield was shattered almost instantly. After the surging sword energy entered his body, Jiang Jingqing's vitality was greatly damaged, and he almost died on the spot. If it weren't for Jiang Jingqing's high cultivation level and the vitality in his body was much stronger than Su Feng's, Xianxia's sword would have sent him straight to the afterlife. After narrowly escaping death, Jiang Jingqing's first reaction was to run, as far as he could, but that green light followed him closely like a maggot in a tarsal bone, and he couldn't shake it off no matter how hard he tried. His current wretched appearance perfectly reflected those 8 words, the peak of Taixing, flying immortal with one sword. In fact, from the moment the green light appeared, the 3 words, Mr. Qin, were destined to resound throughout the cultivation world of Wuxia. Unfortunately, there were always people who thought that seeing was believing and hearing was false. They had to witness it with their own eyes to truly understand what it meant by, when 3 people walk together, one is bound to learn from the other. Jiang Jingqing was such an example. Although Mr. Qin cut down Su Feng at the peak of Taixing, Jiang Jingqing would always think that Mr. Qin was no match for him if he hadn't fought him personally. After all, the blood of the Jiang clan flowed in his body, and he cultivated the most complete, immortal method. Su Feng was a higher diviner after all. No matter how weak he should have been able to last 3 to 5 rounds, right? But Su Feng couldn't even take one move from Mr. Qin. Jiang Jingqing admitted that he couldn't do that, so he couldn't imagine that there was someone in this world who could defeat a higher diviner with one move. How was that possible? Was there something fishy going on? Maybe it was a trap set up by Su Feng and Mr. Qin, and their purpose was to elevate Mr. Chen's status so that the entire cultivation world of Wuxia would follow his lead, just like how the leaders of the martial arts world were elected in Wuxia novels. Therefore, when Jiang Jingqing heard that Mr. Chen's father-in-law had come to Daiyu Island, he disregarded his status and injured Qin Yongyan. His purpose was to force Mr. Qin to show up and fight with him. To be honest, Jiang Jingqing's thought process was somewhat similar. This girl can afford such an expensive bag. She must be a mistress. He was able to open his own company at such a young age. It's all thanks to his parents. He won at the starting line from the moment he was born. Who knows what kind of shady business he's doing behind the scenes when he's earning so much money. In this regard, Xianxia only wanted to say one thing to him. Is it that difficult to admit that others are better than you? This was a fundamental difference. Even though Xianxia had only recovered 70% of his strength, there was still a huge gap between him and Jiang Jingqing. The two of them could not be compared at all. Of course, this gap was actually the gap between Earth and Heavenly Spiral. It did not mean that Jiang Jingqing was really useless. Therefore, even though Xianxia's cultivation had long since surpassed the entire Earth, he would not be arrogant and condescending because of this. It was better to be humble as a person. However, since Jiang Jingqing was determined to court death, Xianxia naturally would not show mercy. Otherwise, how could he account to Yingying? His father-in-law was being bullied. As a son-in-law, he naturally had to stand up for him. Therefore, no matter how Jiang Yuankui tried to smooth things over, Xianxia turned a blind eye to it. Today, he was determined to kill Jiang Jingqing on the spot. However, what Xianxia did not expect was, the moment the flying sword shot into Jiang Jingqing's back, a burst of white light suddenly appeared on Jiang Jingqing's body. At the same time, a deep and old voice suddenly sounded on the island. Since he is powerless to resist, I hope that Mr. Qin can be merciful on account of your wife and spare his life for the time being. After the old man's voice sounded, the bronze cauldron that had been standing in the middle of the square started to tremble slightly. Immediately after, a golden light suddenly shot out from the bronze cauldron. The light shot straight into the sky. It was as if a crack had been torn open in the dusky sky in an instant. Under the contrast of the golden light, one could even clearly see the rolling clouds in the sky. Seeing this, Xianxia could not help but frown as he looked at the bronze cauldron in the middle of the square. A faint sneer appeared on his face. It was really similar. After the golden light shot into the sky, a fluorescent golden barrier opened up like an umbrella, instantly enveloping the 17 small islands. The sky suddenly lit up, and the array was activated. For so many years, the Jiang clan had never truly activated the array. Now that it was suddenly activated, everyone was immediately scared out of their wits, so much so that the island was full of panicked shouts. Seeing that the other party had suddenly assumed such a posture, Xianxia gently handed the little fellow in his arms to Qin Ruing, then waved his hand towards the sky. Then, the green light flew straight back to his hand as if it had a mind of its own. Since the other party wanted to fight, then he could only accompany them to the end. After all, it was not certain who was afraid of whom. You are the ones who are stirring up trouble, and you are also the ones who want to make peace. You dare to come to this broken place, and everything is up to you? Is there really such a good thing in the world? You can't really think, this broken array can stop me? After responding coldly to the sky, Xianxia held the long sword in his hand and turned to look at Jiang Jingqing, who had just fallen from the sky and was now lying on the ground, panting heavily. Because of the protection of the array, the sword just now did not directly kill him. However, it did not matter. At most, he would just follow up with another strike. Thus, Xianxia raised his right hand and prepared to strike again. However, at this moment, the old man's voice rang out once more. The Jiang family has no intention of making you an enemy, so this array only has the effect of defense and does not have the ability to kill. This child, Jingqing, has been arrogant since he was young. It is inevitable that he would look down on the heroes of the world. I hope that you will not lower yourself to his level, sir. The name Yamasaro has been passed down for a long time. I'm sure you have some experience in refining medicine. Now that rare treasures are hard to find, there are many people who want to refine a spiritual medicine but cannot find the right ingredients. Recently, there happened to be a ginseng flower on Daiyu Island that has reached 500 years of age. I thought of giving this flower to you as an apology to your father on behalf of Jingqing. I hope that you will be magnanimous and forgive him this time, ginseng flower. After hearing this, even Xianxia could not help but be stunned. A ginseng flower that had just reached 500 years of age. Ginseng flowers were very common in Heavenly Spiral, but the rare ones were those that were exactly 500 years old. A little is not enough, but a lot is more than enough. It was not too much, not too little. Who would have thought that Daiyu Island would have such a rare treasure? Perhaps it was because he had not seen anything good in a long time, but Xianxia could not help but feel a little moved. However, after thinking about it, he still replied coldly, "Don't blame me for not showing mercy. If you want to blame someone, you can only blame yourself for being blind and hurting someone who should not have been hurt." After saying that, Xianxia continued to walk towards Jiang Jingqing with his sword in hand. In reality, even if Xianxia had been injured, there was still room for negotiation for the sake of this ginseng flower. However, Jiang Jingqing had injured Qin Yongyan. How could they continue the negotiation? There was no room for negotiation at all. Because Jiang Jingqing's injuries were too severe, he was already in a semi-conscious state. He had no idea that death was slowly approaching him. Jiang Yuankue stood on the steps and was so anxious that he wanted to call the police, but he did not dare to stop him. He was really afraid that if Xianxia was unhappy, he would cut him down as well. At such a critical juncture, it was obvious that only the old man whom he had never met before could stop Xianxia. Just as expected. Just as Xianxia was about to swing his sword, the old man's voice rang out unhurriedly. "Sir, you're actually here for your wife, right? The matter of Si Mingxian Nu involves the secrets of our clan. It should not be mentioned to outsiders. If you're willing to let Jingqing live, I promise to tell you everything I know." Chapter 357. What do you think? Although Daiyu Island was the Jiang clan's territory, the old man was very humble, as if he was really afraid of Xianxia. Seeing that the old man's attitude was so proper, Xianxia stopped and began to think after listening to his words. At that moment, Qin Ruing suddenly called out to him. "Shi." It was just a simple word, but Xianxia immediately understood what she meant. Ying was advising him to be lenient. After all, their family was not the dragon of Kunshan, nor were they wolves, tigers, or leopards. Naturally, they would not let the Jiang clan go bankrupt because of this. It was about time. Of course, he had to listen to his wife. However, Xianxia already had a plan in mind, so he pretended to be hesitant. Xianxia did not say anything, so naturally, no one dared to say anything either. The dilapidated square was deathly silent. Jiang Yuankui looked at Xianxia nervously, feeling as if his heart was about to jump out of his throat. How could there be such a terrifying person in this world? Not only Su Feng, but even second granduncle could not take a single blow from him. Could it be that this person came from the sky? Thinking of this, Jiang Yuankui could not help but look up at the cloud vortex in the sky. The golden light was still dazzling. However, he felt a chill in his heart for no reason. Could it be the prophecy left by the ancestor really came true one day? As people often say, sometimes it is not good to know too much. Being muddle-headed is the true meaning of life. Jiang Yuankui was clearly such an example. He looked at Xianxia's back, but his mind was filled with distracting thoughts. After an unknown period of time, Xianxia's voice brought Jiang Yuankui back to reality. All right, then I will let him live. I hope you don't disappoint me. After saying this, Xianxia suddenly waved his sleeve, and an invisible force swept up Jiang Jingqing, then threw him directly to Jiang Yuankui. After Jiang Yuankui hurriedly caught Jiang Jingqing, the old man's voice sounded again. That's great. Please move to Heron Island, Mr. Qin. Yuankui, lead the way for Mr. The so-called Egret Island was actually the smallest of the 17 islands. At the same time, it was also the Jiang clan's forbidden area. Ordinary people were not allowed to enter. Under Jiang Yuankui's guidance, Xianxia's family of 3 took a small boat to Heron Island. Apart from Jiang Yuankui, there was also the cold-faced woman from before. After Jiang Yuankui's introduction, Xianxia found out that this woman was actually the Jiang clan's Siming Xiannu, Jiang Yuanqing. Since Jiang Yuanqing was of the same generation as Jiang Yuankui, his age would naturally not be that young. Xiannu of the 10,000 Holy Valley would automatically step down from her position at the age of 30. Jiang Yuanqing, a middle-aged Xiannu woman, was able to sit firmly in the position of Xiannu's high priestess. Just this point alone was enough to show that the Jiang clan was indeed in possession of some secrets that were unknown to others. The boat quickly approached Heron Island. As soon as they got off the boat, the little fellow's attention was immediately attracted by a few red-crowned cranes. Papa, what's this? I think I've seen them before. As she spoke, the little fellow ran over eagerly. However, because these red-crowned cranes were too tall, she did not dare to get close. She could only stand timidly at the side, looking extremely cute. These are red-crowned cranes. You can also call them red-crowned cranes. There are only about 1,000 of them in the world. They're even rarer than pandas. Red-crowned cranes. I know. I've read about them in books. Perhaps it was because of the abundance of spirit energy on Daiyu Island. These red-crowned cranes were obviously somewhat human. Seeing the little fellow approaching, not only did they not leave, but they even took the initiative to stretch their necks over. Seeing this, the little fellow could not help but reach out to touch their feathers. She was overjoyed. This child was almost bored to death on the yacht. Now that she finally found a few red-crowned cranes to play with, Xianxia naturally had to let her have fun. Thus, Xianxia asked for the little fellow's opinion. After confirming that the little fellow wanted to play here for a while, he handed the long sword in his hand to Qin Rung. He then continued to follow Jiang Yuankui to the depths of Heron Island. As a forbidden area of the clan, Heron Island was like a paradise on earth. The paths in the forest crisscrossed, and it was truly charming. Birds chirped, and colorful butterflies danced. Under the illumination of the Great Formation's golden light, the island was even more like a celestial scene with rosy clouds and lingering smoke. The center of Heron Island was not a mountain peak, but a clear lake. There was a wooden building in the center of the lake. It looked like a pavilion, but it was not a pavilion. Therefore, it looked a little like the pavilion in the middle of the lake where Ning Kaichen and Ye Shaoqian met in the movie, A Chinese Ghost Story. After arriving at the bridge, Jiang Yuankui bowed to Qinshi. He then pointed at the building in the center of the lake and said very respectfully, "The Jiang family's illustrious ancestor has been waiting for you here for a long time. It's not appropriate for me to go near, so please go ahead on your own." Qinshi did not stand on ceremony when he heard that. He slowly walked toward the pavilion in the middle of the lake. The pavilion in the middle of the lake only had a curtain for blocking. Qinshi waited outside the pavilion for a while. Seeing that there seemed to be no movement in the pavilion, he directly opened the curtain and walked in. As soon as he entered the room, the first thing that came into view was a table. Qinshi raised his head to take a look. His attention was attracted by an item placed on the table. There was a soul crystal on the table. Furthermore, this soul crystal was even larger than Qinshi's soul crystal. A little interesting. Qinshi smiled and shook his head. Then he sat down on the armchair. After taking a seat, he looked at the soul crystals on the table and slowly said, "I really didn't think that someone would be able to form a nascent soul under such harsh conditions. That's quite impressive, sir, you flatter me." As soon as he finished speaking, the old man's voice suddenly rang out in the room. And the source of the voice, it was none other than the soul crystal on the counter. Qinshi did not find this strange at all. Instead, he looked at the portrait on the table with interest. Then he smiled and asked, "Is that you?" "That's me." You were quite handsome when you were young." But the conversation came to an abrupt end. The room suddenly quieted down. It was so quiet that the sound of the wind outside could be heard. It seemed that no one wanted to speak again. In fact, since the first time Qinshi saw this soul crystal, he understood why the old man always gave in to him. Diviners were only pseudo-cores. Only those who were above diviners could be called golden cores. So far, among all the people Qinshi had met, except for Bai Hong's group who came down from the heavenly gate, this old man who hid Yuanying in the soul crystal in front of him had the highest cultivation. When the forest was big, there would naturally be all kinds of birds. So, the only thing that surprised Qinshi was that this old man did not even have a body, but he still had to rely on the soul crystal to survive. How many years had he lived? 500 years? Or 1,000 years? In any case, he had lived longer than Qinshi. Chapter 358. Looking at the soul crystal in front of him, Qinshi could not help but put himself in the old man's shoes. If it had been him, he should not be living in this way. It was obvious that the old man could no longer be reborn, so he could only put his Yuanying in the soul crystal, and then rely on the soul crystal to barely maintain the state of his divine soul. Just like the remnant soul of the Azure Dragon in the Sundial Brilliance Temple. But what was the point of this? Without a body, the soul crystal was just a cage in disguise. If one could live for 10 or 20 more years, they might feel that they had profited, but if they really stayed in it for hundreds or even thousands of years, it was a little scary just thinking about it. One had to know that although the divine soul could perceive the outside world in the soul crystal, the feeling was completely different from that of ordinary people. It was probably somewhat similar to a sixth sense. For the old man, it was like being in a world of chaos that had not yet been opened. He could not directly see the outside world, but he could clearly perceive any subtle movements in the outside world. Struggling at death's door in the gap between two worlds, the loneliness brought about by drifting away from reality was actually a kind of torture and punishment that ordinary people could not bear at all. Therefore, Qinshi could not help but sigh from the bottom of his heart. This old man was also a ruthless person. Qinshi silently looked at the portrait on the wall. After a long while, he took the lead to break the silence. "Well, I don't have as much time as you, so don't waste time here. Looking at your age, you should know a lot of things. Let's talk. I'm very interested in the matters of ancient cultivators. Why don't we start talking about it?" Qinshi opened the conversation. But the old man did not immediately answer after hearing it, but instead laughed. Although his expression could not be seen, the laughter gave Qinshi a strange feeling. That feeling. It was somewhat like the young man and wise old man who often appeared in jokes. The young man asked the old man to answer his questions, but the old man smiled and did not say anything, but instead put on a posture of having seen through the world of mortals and understood the true meaning of life. In this regard, Xianxia's reaction was completely different from that of the young man in the joke. Keeping me in suspense, right? All right, take your time. I'm going to kill that guy. As soon as he finished speaking, Xianxia stood up and pretended to leave. His unconventional behavior immediately threw the old man into disarray. He had no choice but to shout anxiously, "Sir, please wait." It's not that this old man is deliberately keeping you in suspense, but it's a long story. "Mister, please take a seat and listen to this old man from the beginning." Hearing this, Xianxia couldn't help but snort coldly. He used his hand to tidy up his clothes, and then slowly sat back down. Could it be that Jiang Jingqing dared to challenge the patriarch in public? Most likely, this old man was backing him up. It seemed like the Jiang clan really had no successors. Otherwise, how could a mere above-heaven tier receive such importance? Xianxia sat in the chair with a cold face. The old man originally wanted to take the opportunity to inquire about Xianxia's background, but he didn't expect Xianxia's style to be so simple and crude, threatening Jiang Jingqing's life at every turn. The hope of the Jiang clan's revival was all placed on Jiang Jingqing. Since Xianxia had already displayed such an attitude, the old man naturally didn't dare to change the topic. He could only open his mouth and tell the story. Actually, this matter starts from ancient times. The so-called ancient times actually referred to the time before the Xia dynasty, which was the time before the birth of human civilization. Western scholars did not recognize the existence of the Xia dynasty. On one hand, it was because Westerners had a different understanding of Wuxia culture. On the other hand, it was because archaeologists had not found any written records of the Xia dynasty. If it weren't for the discovery of the Yin ruins in Yuzhou, Western scholars would even doubt the authenticity of the Shang dynasty. Both the Xia dynasty and the ancient Indian civilization appeared more than 4,000 years ago, while the ancient Egyptian civilization and the Sumerian civilization appeared more than 7,000 years ago. However, it had only been 2,000 years since the day Jesus was born, but human civilization had already stepped into the information age from the Iron Age, the Steam Age, and the Electric Age. It wouldn't be long before human beings could truly enter the space age and soar freely in the universe. How many years had it been? And what about Earth? Earth was already 4.6 billion years old. 46000000000. A series of zeros, wasn't that enough to explain the problem? Therefore, there was no doubt that as early as the ancient times, there were humans on Earth, but they were forced to leave. This was the fundamental reason why humans could still find records of mythical civilizations from ancient books to this day. Earth was a cultivation planet, not a dead planet like Mars. It was the source of life and the beginning of everything. In front of it, immortal cultivators were too insignificant. Tides rose and fell. When the spirit energy of Earth declined, it was like the water of the Pacific Ocean drying up for immortal cultivators. Doomsday came. Fortunately, there was always a way out. Coincidentally, the Tai Ching divine ancestor appeared out of nowhere and saved everyone from the fire and water with his own strength. Although Xianxia already knew this information from Bai Hong, he didn't interrupt the old man. Instead, he silently listened to the old man again. However, as he listened, Xianxia suddenly realized there was a big difference between the old man and Bai Hong's narration. At first, Xianxia suspected that either of them was lying, but on second thought, he immediately dismissed this speculation. After all, it had been 10,000 years since the ancient times. 3 people's words could become a tiger, let alone these legends passed down by word of mouth. Therefore, Xianxia didn't think that either of them was lying to him. One lived on Earth, and the other lived in the great world. The two of them were in different positions, so what they saw and heard was naturally different. Bai Hong focused on the great world, but when it came to the old man, he naturally focused on Earth after the ancient immortal cultivators left. So, the Tai Ching divine ancestor didn't leave with everyone back then, but left some people behind. They either had old grudges with the Taiqing divine ancestor or committed some unforgivable sin. In short, they were abandoned by the Taiqing divine ancestor, so they were forced to stay on Earth. However, the Taiqing divine ancestor was deeply righteous. How could he not understand that the sins of the elders had nothing to do with the juniors? Therefore, the divine ancestor made a promise. As long as the descendants of the sinners could cultivate to the diviner level, they could return to Tiandu through the divine gate. This was the origin of the concept of ascension. In fact, in the beginning, the cultivation environment on Earth wasn't as bad as it was today. Therefore, there were dozens of diviner-level cultivators back then, which led to the legend of the investiture of the gods. Wasn't it a good thing for everyone to form a group and ascend? Unfortunately, no one would have thought that the cultivation environment on Earth would deteriorate so quickly. Starting from the Warring States period, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth began to decrease rapidly, so much so that the divine gate rarely appeared in 100 years. The living environment of immortal cultivators became worse and worse. In the end, they had to hide among the famous mountains and rivers, relying on the weak spiritual energy in the blessed lands to barely maintain their legacies. Thus, the 5 great legacies were born. The immortal cultivators were declining day by day, and there was also the matter of the first emperor burning books and burying scholars. Everything about the ancient immortal cultivators could only regretfully come to an end. Not bad. A very good story. After listening to the old man's detailed narration, Xianxia couldn't help but praise it again and again. It really gave birth to a feeling of looking through history, magnificent and magnificent. It could be said to be soul-stirring. However, although the story was good, Xianxia didn't forget the purpose of this trip. Chapter 359. Just as the old man had promised, as long as Xianxia was willing to spare Jiang Jingqing's life, he would tell Xianxia everything he knew. Reality proved that the old man had no intention of deceiving Xianxia. Perhaps it was out of fear, or perhaps it was because he wanted to form a good relationship with Xianxia, but the old man told him everything he knew without hesitation. However, what Xianxia did not expect was, when he mentioned the name Arbiter of Fate Xiannu, the old man suddenly fell silent. Xianxia waited for a while. When he showed an obvious hint of impatience, the old man's voice slowly sounded from the soul crystal. Arbiter of Fate Xiannu? It has been more than 3,000 years since the Jiang clan stepped foot on Daiyu Island. You are not the first person to ask this question in these 3,000 years, and I believe you will not be the last. The reason why the Jiang clan's Xiannu has a longer lifespan than the Xiannu of the outside world is because there is no real arbiter of fate Xiannu in the Jiang clan. Xianxia could not help but frown slightly when he heard that. There was no Xiannu? Then what about the woman who stood beside Jiang Yuankue and gave orders? Although Xianxia did not say anything, the old man seemed to have sensed his thoughts and immediately added, Yuan Qing is indeed the current arbiter of fate Xiannu of the Jiang clan. She is responsible for presiding over the clan's sacrificial ceremonies, praying for blessings and other matters. However, compared to your wife, her Xiannu is just a fake. As soon as he said this, Xianxia instantly understood what the old man meant. He had long known that the condition to become a Xiannu was to give up the earthly soul. He had originally thought that the Jiang clan had some secret method to extend the Xiannu's lifespan, but in the end, he realized that the so-called secret method was to prevent the Xiannu from giving up the earthly soul. Wasn't the old man talking nonsense with him and wasting his time? The old man's answer made Xianxia quite dissatisfied, but this was obviously not the time to flare up, so he could only frown and ask, I don't have time to talk nonsense with you. You have to answer me honestly. Xiannu is a fait accompli. Is there any way to cure her? At this point, Xianxia couldn't help but promise the old man, you should know how important this matter is to me. If you help me today, I promise, even if I have to go through water and tread on fire in the future, I will definitely return this favor to you. I won't go back on my word. Xianxia, who never made promises easily, took the initiative to make a promise to the old man at this moment. It was easy to imagine how anxious he was. Although Qin Ring only had a slight headache, Xianxia felt as if he was facing a formidable enemy. In fact, in the end, he was just afraid. afraid of losing. After all, he had already separated from Ying once. The husband and wife had gone through different kinds of suffering and torment to finally get to where they were today. The family of 3 had finally reunited and lived a happy life together. If Qin Ruing was safe and sound, then it would be fine. But if something happened to her, she would never forgive himself. Absolutely not. Of course, these emotions were buried in the deepest part of his heart. Naturally, she couldn't easily reveal them. Therefore, after making his promise, he silently waited for the old man's answer. The room was very quiet. It was so quiet that he could even hear the wind outside. The white curtain was gently blown by the wind, just like his heart that couldn't calm down. After an unknown amount of time, the old man's voice rang out again. However, the old man didn't rush to answer Qianxi's question. Instead, he changed the topic and asked coldly, "I can answer your question, but before that, please answer this old man's 3 questions, okay?" Although he didn't know what the old man was up to, now was not the time to be anxious, so Qianxi could only answer patiently, "Please go ahead." The first question, "Sir, do you know what realm the divine ancestor was at back then?" Hearing the old man's question, Qianxi couldn't help but be stunned. Although he wasn't interested in these unimportant things, since the old man mentioned it, there must be a reason, so he seriously thought about it. Qi refinement, foundation establishment, golden core, yuanying, soul formation, insightful void, Tao integration, tribulation ascension, Mahayana. Since the divine ancestor was able to find a great world in the void, his cultivation must be at least above the insightful void realm, or even the legendary Tao integration realm. Such a powerful person was definitely a big shot in the heavenly jade world, comparable to the sect master of the divine sect. Thinking of this, even Qianxi couldn't help but yearn for it. Earth used to be, perhaps it was more prosperous than he had imagined. While Qianxi was pondering, the old man didn't give him time to think at all, and directly continued to ask the second question. 10,000 years ago, how many cultivators were there in the divine continent? This question really tested Qianxi. He wasn't an archaeologist, how would he know how many people there were at that time? But then, the old man threw out a third question. The third question, "Sir, how do you think the divine ancestor could bring all these people to the great world with his strength alone?" At this point, if Qianxi still didn't understand what the old man meant, it could only mean that he was too stupid. Therefore, the moment the old man finished asking the third question, Qianxi suddenly stood up from his chair as if he had been electrocuted, and then couldn't help but exclaim, "The arbiter of fate Xian Nu?" Yes, yes. Sir, you should also know that the arbiter of fate is the mandate of heaven, but how can we cultivators believe in the groundless heaven? The so-called heaven's will, it's the divine ancestor's order to bear the fate of all living beings. Bear the fate of all living beings? When he heard this, Qianxi's expression changed drastically. He could already guess what the old man wanted to say. Although the Taiqing divine ancestor was omnipotent, he couldn't bring millions of ancient cultivators to the great world with his strength alone. Therefore, there had to be some secret behind this. And the key to this secret was clearly the arbiter of fate Xian Nu. As expected, the old man quickly confirmed Qianxi's guess. The arbiter of fate Xian Nu, that's a nice title, but to put it bluntly, they're the living sacrifices chosen by the divine ancestor. Everyone says that the divine ancestor has the merit of saving the world, and with his omnipotent power he turned the tide and saved the world. But they've forgotten the road to the great world. Chapter 360. A Living Sacrifice. The moment he heard these 3 words, Qianxi understood everything. Even if the grand pure divine ancestor's cultivation was extremely high, it was impossible for him to forcefully open and stabilize the passage between the 2 worlds by himself. After all, there were too many people who needed him to save. Not 1,000, not 10,000, but millions and tens of millions. The grand pure divine ancestor did indeed save the world. But at the same time, this contribution was also stained with the blood of too many innocent people. Not everyone could travel through the void and cross realms as they wished. Therefore, the grand pure divine ancestor could only rely on external forces to allow everyone to go to the great world unharmed. If the sundial brilliance temple was the coordinate between the two worlds, then the soul of Xiannu was the track to the great world. When the end of the world was approaching, the train led by the grand pure divine ancestor carried the hopes of the ancient cultivators and rumbled toward the great world full of the unknown. The only place that was not harmonious was probably the railroad track. There were millions of people who needed to be saved. The number of Xiannu who needed to be sacrificed was also not a small number. One after another, weak and fragile souls. In terms of individual strength, they were not even worth mentioning. They were too weak. A single strand of silk could not make a thread, and a single tree could not make a forest. Under the guidance of the grand pure divine ancestor, these weak souls of Xiannu were connected to each other one by one. Like sections of track, they paved all the way from Earth to the great world, forcibly opening up a path of survival for the cultivators in the Age of Doom. How was this a path of survival? It was a nether river full of wronged souls. Because only through the guidance of Xiannu's soul could the grand pure divine ancestor use this to stabilize the passage between the two worlds, so that those who were not at the soul formation stage could safely pass through the void cracks. Although he had not witnessed this history with his own eyes, Xianxia had a rough understanding of that ancient era. He was even willing to believe this was not a dark past, but a grand epic. In order to continue the legacy of the ancient cultivators, even the weak Xiannu was willing to sacrifice her life to protect the legacy of the ancient cultivators. Traveling in the wind and rain, passing on the torch. Despite all the hardships, the jade was finally formed. In truth, the sacred ancestor wasn't wrong. With the divine ancestor's cultivation, there was no need for him to care about the lives and deaths of all living beings. Wouldn't it be great for him to live a carefree life in the great world by himself? But he didn't. Instead, he chose to return to Earth and seek a chance of survival for all living beings with his own strength. It was a pity. History had already proven that the founder of every dynasty was great, but after that, each generation would be worse than the last. The world only remembered the peerless leader, but forgot about the Siming Xiannu who had sacrificed everything to save them. This was also the reason why Bai Hong knew nothing about Siming Xiannu. No matter what the reason was, the survivors of the great world had long forgotten the greatness of Siming Xiannu. Back then, the divine ancestor gathered the most precious treasures in the world and refined a total of 13 soul-amassing cauldrons. There is one in each of the 5 places of inheritance, and the other 8 are scattered in the divine land. Now, no one knows where they are. These 13 soul-amassing cauldrons and the heaven-bearing efficate floating dawn mirror formed the set of supreme treasures that could save all living beings. Of course, the soul-amassing cauldron was mainly used to collect Xiannu's earthly soul. The heaven-bearing efficate floating dawn mirror was the true core. After Xiannu offered her earthly soul to the soul-amassing cauldron, the divine ancestor held the mirror in his hand and led everyone to the blissful great world in the void. The old man recounted the events of the past. After hearing this, Xianxia frowned and seemed to be thinking about something. Seeing that he didn't intend to speak, the old man paused for a moment before continuing. I'm sure you know that with your wife's current cultivation, she definitely wouldn't have fallen sick if her soul was fine. So I'm guessing this might have something to do with the heaven-bearing efficate floating dawn mirror. After all, this treasure was left behind by the divine ancestor. No one knows what secrets are hidden in it. If you want to completely solve this problem, I'm afraid you have to find the heaven-bearing efficate floating dawn mirror first. After the old man finished speaking, the room fell silent again. After a long time, Xianxia seemed to be talking to himself and couldn't help but mutter, "Sky-bearing imitation Fu Li mirror, right?" Seeing that his reaction was a little strange, the old man comforted him. For thousands of years, I've seen many similar situations. Many Xiannu wanted to cultivate when they grew up, but because they lacked one of their 3 earthly souls, they could only die with regret. But once they found their earthly soul, they could walk, sit, and lie down. Their spiritual sense was no different from that of ordinary people. Your wife only had a little dizziness and dark vision. It shouldn't be a big deal, so you don't have to worry too much. Not a big deal? Xianxia wasn't as optimistic about this as the old man. But now wasn't the time to be worrying unnecessarily, so he could only put this problem aside for the time being. He then stood up and said, "All right, since I've said what I needed to say, let's leave it at that for today. I'll remember this favor. In the future, if the Jiang family has anything to ask of me, I won't hesitate to help." Then I'll thank Mr. Chen first. The conversation finally came to an end. Jiang Yuankue had been waiting at the bridge for a long time. When he saw Xianxia walk out of the room, he immediately went to the pavilion in the middle of the lake. After sneaking a peek at the situation in the room, he finally felt relieved. It seemed like he was really afraid that Xianxia would hurt the elder ancestor. "All right, you don't have to follow me. Go inside and wait." When Xianxia saw that Jiang Yuankue wanted to send him off, he waved his hand and rejected him. Then he walked back the way he came from. When he returned to the shore, the little fellow was still playing with the red-crowned cranes in the pond. These red-crowned cranes were like dolphins. They would rub against her from time to time, which really made the little fellow very happy. If it weren't for Qin Ruoying's repeated dissuasion, the little fellow even wanted to bring a few of them back. The little fellow was very happy, but Xianxia's mood didn't seem to be very good. The little fellow had long been trained to observe people's expressions. When she saw that Xianxia was unhappy, she didn't dawdle anymore. After waving goodbye to the red-crowned cranes, she lay in Xianxia's arms and obediently got on the boat. Under the gaze of the Jiang family, the yacht slowly sailed away from the dock. At this time, Qin Ruoying gently held Xianxia's hand and asked softly, "What's wrong?" "Nothing." Xianxia pinched the little fellow's butt and signaled her to sit still. After that, he held Qin Ruoying's hand and went to the bow of the boat. It was late at night. A bright moon hung high above the sea, constantly emitting a cold light. Looking at his lover beside him, Xianxia couldn't help but ask faintly, "Inying, what kind of person do you think I am?" "Why would you ask that?" "I'm actually a very selfish person." "I don't think so." Qin Ruoying felt that something was wrong with Xianxia. She imitated the little fellow and put her head on his other shoulder, hoping to make him feel at ease. However, Xianxia looked as if he was sick. He stared blankly at the bright moon and replied in a daze, "Really, I'm very selfish. For you, I can give up the whole world. All living beings are just ants in my eyes. If one day you're no longer here, I think I might be able to destroy this world and make all the unpleasant things disappear." Xianxia was still expressing his feelings when Qin Ruoying suddenly pinched him and said with an unhappy face, "What nonsense are you talking about?" The little fellow didn't understand what they were talking about, but she could clearly feel that her mother was angry, so she imitated Qin Ruoying, raised her head and said in a coquettish voice, "What nonsense are you talking about?" Well, the eldest and the second in the family were furious. Xianxia had to immediately raise his hands to surrender and apologize. Okay, I'm talking nonsense. Inying, don't be angry. And you, why are you making a fuss? I'm not making a fuss." Hearing this, the little fellow immediately pouted and retorted with dissatisfaction, "It's Papa's disobedience that made Mama angry. I'm so obedient, Mama won't be angry with me." Okay, you're the most obedient. Come, let Daddy kiss you." "But I'm angry." After saying that, the little fellow immediately turned her head to the side and refused to let Xianxia kiss her no matter what. One wanted to kiss, the other wanted to block. Looking at the noisy father and daughter, Qin Ruoying couldn't help but smile, and then she leaned her head on Xianxia's shoulder again. In fact, she knew what Xianxia was worried about. But for her, instead of deliberately preparing for a rainy day, it was better to live in the moment calmly. People often have thousands of thoughts about the future, but they forget to calm down and appreciate the present moment. The future days. Chapter 361. The next morning, under the caress of the morning sun, the yacht slowly sailed into the Zhonghai harbor. Although they were in Zhonghai, the couple had no intention of disturbing Lin Xian. The family of three was like a group of tourists passing by in a hurry. They didn't even stay for long. After accompanying the little one for a meal of KFC at the airport, they got on the plane back home. The only gain from this trip to Xianxia was, perhaps it was success that put Xianxia in a bad mood. They really came in high spirits, but returned in disappointment. Obviously, the sky-bearing art and floating dawn mirror had already gone to the great world with the Taiching sage. If he wanted to completely cure Qin Ruing's dizziness, then he had to go to the great world himself. In this regard, Xianxia only had 3 words in his mind, F***CKU. He had just returned from the heavenly spiral world after a narrow escape, but now he had to go to a great world like heavenly spiral. Wasn't he just too bored? Regarding this unknown world, Xianxia had long made up her mind to keep a respectful distance from it. But fortunately, ever since he destroyed the 5 holy palaces, no matter how turbulent the spirit energy tide was, the divine gate didn't appear again. This also indirectly proved that the great world had lost contact with Earth. In fact, whether it was immortal cultivation techniques or modern technology, if one wanted to teleport from one place to another, the coordinates were essential. Without the coordinates, the divine gate would never open again. Unless the Taiching sage came back and crossed the void to establish new coordinates for the ancient immortal cultivators. And this was also why Xianxia said he was selfish, because he had also cut off the possibility of celestial ascension. From now on, the 2 worlds would no longer have any communication. The people above couldn't come down, and the people below couldn't go up. You were in your great world, and I was in my global village. Everyone minded their own business. Wasn't that good? Since it was impossible to get the sky-bearing art and floating dawn mirror, Qin Ruing's illness could only be temporarily put aside for observation. On the way back, Xianxia felt that something was wrong the more he thought about it. Previously, he had placed all his attention on Siming Xiannu and neglected the old man's strange behavior. Was it really so easy to deal with an old monster that had lived for over 1,000 years? Besides, since the Jiang clan did not have the Siming Xiannu, how did Daiyu Island become one of the 5 great lands of inheritance? The old man's story should be true, but Xianxia had a feeling that the old man was deliberately hiding some important information. However, since he did not plan to go to the great world, he did not need to delve too deeply into these things. Anyway, Daiyu Island was right there. Once Xianxia realized that the old monster had lied to him, he could not guarantee that he would do something terrible. After the family of 3 returned to Shangjing, their days were peaceful again. The summer sun shone brightly, and the willows by the lakeside rustled gently. Sightseeing, playing in the water, and flying kites, Hohai had different sceneries throughout the year. Time passed quietly amidst the laughter of the 3 little fellows. In the blink of an eye, the summer vacation was over, and the country welcomed the start of school again. And this little guy had finally ushered in the most important phase of his life. School. To be honest, Nian Nian's personality had begun to change under the intentional indulgence of her husband and wife. Although she was still the obedient, sensible, and polite little fellow, she would throw a tantrum from time to time now. She had some traces of a spoiled brat. Of course, Xianxia and Qin Ruing could not be blamed for this. After all, they owed their child too much. Nian Nian had been an orphan since she was young. Now that she finally had her parents, shouldn't she throw a tantrum and experience the feeling of being doted on by her parents? Childhood, happiness was the most important thing. However, a child could throw a tantrum at home, but no one would indulge her outside. Therefore, a few days before school started, Xianxia seriously tutored the little fellow and warned her about many things. For example, she had to study hard in school, listen to the teachers, abide by the school rules, and not bully her classmates. Of course, she could not be bullied by her classmates. When Xianxia mentioned the last point, before the little fellow had time to nod, the 2 brothers couldn't wait and shouted loudly, "With us here, no one dares to bully her." The younger brother, who had always been straightforward and honest, did not forget to add at this moment, "If anyone bullies you, just tell me. I'll help you beat him up." To me. Let's beat him up together. Okay. Yes, the 2 brothers also wanted to go to school with Nian Nian. Although it was only a senior class, this was the first step in the little fellow's student life. Therefore, even though Xianxia had always said that he wanted to let Nian Nian live an ordinary life, when it came time to choose, he still listened to his sister-in-law's advice and chose the Donghua Gate Kindergarten, which was located next to the Forbidden City and was known as the best in the country. It was not an exaggeration. If one stood outside and casually threw a brick into the kindergarten, it might hit the grandson of some big boss. One could imagine how deep the background of this kindergarten was. It was said that the children of the rich won at the starting line. From this moment on, the competition had already begun. Donghua Gate Kindergarten was less than 5 kilometers away from Hohai. On the first day of school, there was no way to take the school bus, so Xianxia had to personally send the 3 of them to school. Along the way, the 3 little fellows were extremely happy. They carried the same style of cartoon school bag. Nian walked in the middle, and the 2 brothers stood on her left and right, like guardians, protecting her at all times. A bus slowly drove over from afar. Xianxia did not have any reaction, but the 2 brothers excitedly squeezed Nian onto the sidewalk, and then very seriously warned, "Nian, when you walk, you have to look at the bus. Look at how big that bus is. If it hits you, you'll be dead. Do you understand?" The little fellow nodded blankly. Then she looked back at Xianxia. After seeing Xianxia smile and nod at her, she turned her head and began to look at the bus next to her. Everything was too novel. Although she had been to kindergarten before, this seemed to be the first time she went to school. Papa also said that in the future, they would have to take the school bus to and from school. School bus? What was that? Thinking about it, the little fellow could not help but raise her head and look around. On the old streets of Shangjing, the bright sunlight shone on her through the shade of the trees. The surrounding cars and pedestrians seemed to be a little different from usual. Was this going to school? Xianxia walked with the 3 children for a while. After confirming the dedicated parking space for the school bus, he took a taxi directly to Donghua Gate Kindergarten. It was only 5 kilometers, so they arrived very quickly. As soon as they got out of the car, Xianxia realized that this kindergarten was indeed a little famous. The cars parked in front of the school were not particularly expensive luxury cars, but the license plates all started with Beijing A. It should be known that most of the cars starting with Beijing A8 were leaders of the government, while Beijing AG6 was national level. However, none of the cars with Beijing A license plates were easy to deal with. Even the traffic police had to go around them. At this time, Xianxia suddenly remembered, this was Shangjing. Next door was the Forbidden City, and next door was Zongnanhai. Would the security guard let someone like him in by taxi? Of course, this was only Xianxia's imagination. After he showed the procedures that his sister-in-law had done for him in advance, the security guard at the door respectfully welcomed him in. How sensitive were Xianxia's ears! Therefore, as soon as he entered the school, he found that these parents basically knew each other. Everyone even greeted each other. Since the parents knew each other, the children were naturally childhood sweethearts as well. Seeing this, Xianxia frowned slightly. These children. Chapter 362. The children of the courtyard could also be considered a characteristic of Wuxia. In the past, the units had to allocate houses and everyone in the unit lived together. Everyone saw each other all day long and their children would naturally play together since they were young. They were the so-called childhood sweethearts. Of course, it would be fine if it was an ordinary unit. The children of the courtyard that people talked about were mostly the children of high-ranking cadres. Their parents either held important positions in various ministries or were cadres above the regimental level. These children grew up together since they were young. There was a clear distinction between who could play with whom and who could oppose whom. In addition, because they had seen a lot since they were young, the children of the courtyard were usually more mature. In this regard, Xianxia had to hesitate. If he put Nian among these children, for her growth, was it good or bad? However, after thinking about it, Xianxia still felt relieved. After all, these children had received different education since they were young and there were more restrictions in various aspects. If he really wanted to compare, it might be easier to get along with them than children from ordinary families. In short, he would give it a try first. If Nian was unhappy, he would find another place for her. While thinking, Xianxia led the 3 children into the school. Today was the registration day. The main purpose was to help the children adapt to the environment of the kindergarten. It was not official enrollment yet. Therefore, after Xianxia filled in the form, he led the 3 children to the classroom under the guidance of the teacher. Since the school was so famous, there must be some skills in the background. Xianxia glanced casually and found that there seemed to be more teachers in the school than there were parents. There were main class teachers, assistant class teachers, auxiliary class teachers, life teachers, care and health teachers. There was everything along the way. Regardless of whether they knew each other, the teachers were very kind and greeted the 3 children. Those who did not know would think that they were eating hay de leo. Under the guidance of the teacher, they quickly arrived at the big classroom. The 3 children did not go to the middle class but came directly to the big class. Such unfamiliar faces naturally attracted the attention of the other parents. Other families usually had one person dragging one person, but Xianxia was dragging 3 people. In addition, he was a new face, so everyone couldn't help but whisper to each other. "Oldly, have you seen this person before? It looks like a new face. He didn't even come to the parent-teacher meeting yesterday. Didn't you see the enrollment list before? Which unit is he from?" Now that you mention it, I remember that there were originally only 60 spots for this semester. However, a few days before the start of the semester, 3 spots were forcefully inserted. They didn't even attend the interview and just waited to report. You didn't even attend the interview? So powerful. Isn't that so? When I brought the child here, I didn't even pass the interview. If it weren't for my uncle, I reckon it would have been over. We begged, and it wasn't easy for us to get a spot. Yet he casually dragged in 3 people. This is, sure, you know. After a brief discussion, the 2 parents glanced at each other in tacit understanding. They immediately came up with a plan. There were many small tables in the classroom. 3 to 5 parents gathered around a table with their children. However, similar discussions were constantly taking place at each table. Why do parents nowadays like to let their children go to good schools? Grades were only one of the reasons. The most important thing was, a good school could build better connections for the children, and the importance of these connections could not be compared with a few simple numbers on the report card. Classmate relationships. Only 10 or 20 years later, when everyone had stepped into society, would they deeply realize how valuable this word was. Although everyone was whispering, Xianxia pretended not to hear them. As soon as he entered the classroom, he took the 3 children and sat down according to their nameplates. The children in the kindergarten were still young. Naturally, it was impossible for the children to go on stage and introduce themselves as soon as they entered the classroom. Therefore, they could only wait for the children to adapt before the teachers arranged for them to begin the self-introduction. There were many delicate little toys on the table. As soon as they sat down, the 3 children were attracted by these toys. The teachers were indeed very attentive. They even prepared an exclusive gift bag for each child. The little girl was still very familiar with her name. Therefore, she immediately grabbed the gift box with the words, "Qinyan," written on it and couldn't wait to open it. Inside was a children's picture book that could be used in both Chinese and English. At the same time, there were many exquisite puzzle toys. Therefore, the 3 children immediately gathered together to play like they did in the tea house. There were already 2 children sitting at this table. Seeing that they were so lively, the 2 children went over to play with them. Perhaps because she had stayed in the tea house for a long time, Nian usually played with unfamiliar children. Therefore, she did not hesitate. With a wave of her small hand, she very generously invited the 2 children. It was fun with more people. Since the children were playing together, the adults naturally took the opportunity to strike up a conversation. "Bro, are you a dragon phoenix triplet?" The one who spoke was a bespectacled man about the same age as Xianxia. Although the bespectacled man wore casual clothes and spoke casually, he exuded a strong aura. However, he exuded a strong sense of self-confidence, and this kind of self-confidence did not make people feel disgusted. It was as if he was supposed to be like this. After hearing the bespectacled man's words, Xianxia responded with a smile. "No, they are the children of friends. The 2 families are close to each other. They help each other out when they have time. Oh, so that's the case. The bespectacled man did not seem to expect that there would be parents who did not bring their children to the registration day, so he was stunned on the spot. At this time, the middle-aged man next to him who had not spoken suddenly reached out his hand to Xianxia and said, "Hello, my name is Wang Junqing. This is our child, honey." Seeing this, Xianxia had to politely shake hands with him and then respond, "Hello, my name is Xianxia." "Xianxia?" Wang Junqing murmured the name but found that he had no impression of this name at all, so he turned to look at the bespectacled man. Seeing this, the bespectacled man seemed to have received some instructions. The smile on his face suddenly became a lot more enthusiastic. Almost instantly, he reached out his right hand to Xianxia. "Hello, Brother Chen, my name is Zhao Ziyu." Speaking of this, Zhao Ziyu deliberately paused and then seemed to casually add, "I live in the planning commission courtyard like Brother Wang, so the children of our two families are very familiar with each other since young. Generally, we don't play with other children. I didn't expect to get together with your child so quickly today. It seems that they really hit it off. He's just a kid. He can play with anyone." The bespectacled man's words had a deeper meaning, but Xianxia did not seem to understand. After responding lightly, he did not speak anymore. One must know that the courtyard was also divided into different grades. The Planning Commission courtyard was the highest grade courtyard in the entire Wuxia. It was not because of external factors such as geography, environment, living conditions, etc., but because a total of more than 200 top bosses walked out of this courtyard. Any one of them was enough to make Wuxia tremble. The reason why the bespectacled man deliberately revealed to Xianxia was that he really could not understand Xianxia's background, so he wanted to show his cards. If Xianxia's identity was at this level, then everyone could talk happily. If he couldn't reach it, there are so many seats, please change to another one. In fact, the courtyard was a circle. Chapter 363. After the bespectacled man explained everything to Xianxia, he couldn't help but put on a haughty look. He was confident, but he didn't know that this confidence was meaningless in front of Xianxia. Therefore, after Xianxia chuckled a few times, he acted as if he didn't understand the bespectacled man's words and turned to talk to Wang Junqing about the child. In this spacious and warm classroom, he wasn't a god, nor was he Mr. Chen. He was just a child's father. Seeing that Xianxia didn't play by the rules, Wang Junqing couldn't figure him out for a while. However, he didn't neglect Xianxia because of this. Since he didn't want to talk, then he couldn't blame him for investigating on his own. Therefore, after giving the bespectacled man a look, Wang Junqing followed the topic and started chatting with Xianxia. If you ignored the content of their conversation, the atmosphere was similar to a business gathering. Just a few glasses of wine and there would be a harmonious atmosphere of drinking and chatting. Perhaps it was because they were accompanied by their parents, the children quickly adapted to the classroom environment, and then they began to play freely. A few of them were lively and started to clamor about going outside to play on the slide. Seeing that the atmosphere was lively enough, the teacher came to the center of the classroom and kindly asked the children to stand up one by one. Then, she guided them to start introducing themselves. It was the little girl's first time facing such a situation, so she was naturally a little embarrassed when it was her turn. Under Xianxia's constant encouragement, the little girl finally mustered up the courage to stand up and say timidly, My name is Chen Yan. I'm 5 years old this year." It was just a few simple words, but she stuttered as if she was stuttering. After saying that, the little girl immediately shut her mouth and stood there timidly, not knowing what to do. "Very good. From today onwards, Chen Yan is a member of our big family. Come, let's welcome her together. Welcome the new student." After saying that, the teacher took the lead and applauded. When the children saw this, they followed the teacher's example and clapped while shouting, "Welcome the new student." Speaking of which, this was the first time in Yan Yan's life that she had officially integrated into a group. That strange feeling immediately made her feel a little overwhelmed, so she could only lower her head and constantly tug at the corner of her clothes with her hands. That shy and bashful look on her face was extremely adorable. After Xianxia pulled her back to her seat, the little thing slowly opened her eyes again. Then she carefully listened to each student's self-introduction, and under the guidance of the teacher, she kept applauding. It looked like she was trying to integrate herself into this new group. The little girl was already so nervous, not to mention the brothers. Of course. When it was Wenwen's self-introduction, he actually said, My name is Xia Ming. When he heard this, he corrected him, Xia, don't believe him. He's Xiaowen. Xia Ming. My Xia. The older brother instinctively retorted. Then, as if he suddenly came back to his senses, he couldn't help but mumble weakly, No. I'm Xiaowen, he's Xia Ming. The twins were extremely eye-catching wherever they went. When the two brothers made such a scene, all the parents present were immediately amused and laughed. The other children looked at them in confusion. They really didn't understand what was going on. How could two people in this world look exactly the same? Everyone looked at the brothers curiously. The differences in the brothers' personalities were completely on display here. The older brother, who had always been shrewd and never let himself be taken advantage of, was now blushing like a monkey's butt. The younger brother, who had always been simple and honest, was not at all timid in the face of everyone's stares. Instead, he was complaining that his older brother was using his identity. The two brothers were like two pistachios, immediately making everyone laugh out loud. Just like that, Xianxia led the three children into the capital city's second-generation circle. And the curtains slowly began on the three children's school days. After all, kindergarten life was quite relaxing. Perhaps because of the brothers' company, the little girl didn't cry from beginning to end. Sometimes, she even took the initiative to say that she wanted to go to kindergarten. Xianxia said that the little girl would take the school bus by herself, but when it was time to go to school, he still personally picked her up and sent her to school every day. At the same time, he also instructed Big Cat to wait outside the kindergarten gate at all times. From this, it could be seen that he really cared for Nian to the extreme. When life was on the right track, time seemed to pass much faster. In the blink of an eye, it was National Day again. It was cold in the north, and at this time, people all wrapped up their jackets. There was no military parade this year, so naturally, there were fewer tourists in Shangjing than in previous years. It was still the large courtyard, but compared to the desolation of previous years, the Qin family's courtyard was particularly lively this year. Early in the morning, Gu Lao took the brothers to the courtyard. Xiao Yuan was busy moving out all the tables and chairs in the house, while her sister-in-law and Qin Yongyan sat in the main hall to discuss their own understanding. Even Qin Ruoying, who hadn't shown up for a long time, today, she finally got Xianxia's permission to make an exception and take a day off. In fact, since the family of three returned from Daiyu Island, Qin Ruoying became the one who worked the hardest. She was cultivating in seclusion almost all the time. Chapter 364. Rain moistens all things and nourishes the common people. In this bleak and cold late autumn, a sudden downpour instantly extinguished everyone's rising spirits because of the National Day holiday. Heavy rain was always accompanied by strong winds, and this was the north. When the heavy rain came down, it immediately drenched people from top to bottom. On the streets of the capital, people hid under the eaves and shivered. Everyone was hoping that the rain would stop, but they didn't know that. This rain, it was actually a blessing bestowed by God to all things. From the moment the rain started to fall, the big cat was like a clockwork doll that had been activated, running wildly in the rain. Big Head, who had always been trapped in the fish tank and couldn't go anywhere, jumped out of the fish tank like a fish leaping through the dragon gate. Then, through his own hard struggle, he finally jumped into the heavy rain. For most children, being in the rain was always a very fun thing to do, and the three little guys were no exception. At first, the brothers were a little restrained because Gu Lao was present. However, Nian looked back at Xianxia and found that her parents' attention was on the sky. She rushed into the heavy rain and then jumped around the yard with the big cat. She stepped on the water in the yard like a Peppa Pig who liked to step on mud. Her little face was full of excited smiles. The rain drenched her hair, and the line of water almost blurred her eyes, but this made her even happier. Under the constant urging of the little guy, the brothers finally couldn't resist the temptation. The two glanced at Gu Lao, who had just rushed up the steps to hide from the rain, and then jumped into the heavy rain like a wisp of smoke. In the heavy rain in the yard, the three little guys laughed happily. At this time, Gu Lao suddenly came back to his senses. But when he was about to scold the brothers, Xianxia's voice suddenly sounded in his ear. "Let them play for a while. A little rain won't be a problem. There's heating at home. If it's cold, they'll know to come back." Seeing how happy the three children were, coupled with Xianxia's persuasion, Gu Lao's lips moved a few times, but in the end he didn't interrupt them. The heavy rain poured down, washing away the hustle and bustle of the entire city. It was as if the only sound left in the world was the sound of the rain. It was a feast and a carnival. Under Xianxia's signal, Qin Ring also walked into the heavy rain step by step. Shangjing rarely rained, so there was a lot of dust and impurities accumulated in the clouds. When it landed on one's body, there was a sticky feeling. But today's rain was different. Although it was a little cold, the rainwater was exceptionally clear and pure, giving people a comfortable feeling all over their bodies. Spiritual energy turned into rain. Even for Xianxia, this was the first time he had seen such a situation. For a moment, he couldn't help but walk into the rain and began to wantonly plunder the spiritual energy. Rain after a long drought is truly a blessing in life. However, just when everyone was celebrating because of the rain, Qin Ring suddenly felt her legs go soft and she staggered. If Xianxia hadn't caught her in time, she would have fallen into the puddles on the ground. "Yingying? What's wrong?" "My head is a little dizzy." Qin Ring covered her forehead. Her originally rosy face was stained with a layer of white frost, looking as if she was sick. At this time, Qin Xueqing also seemed to feel something and couldn't help but blurt out to Xianxia, "It's here again, that feeling." After saying that, even she covered her forehead with a look of discomfort. Qin Xueqing was already a celestial, but even she was so uncomfortable, one could imagine what kind of experience Qin Ruoying was experiencing at this moment. Xianxia nervously supported Qin Ruoying, and at the same time constantly poured his true essence into her, trying to ease her symptoms. But why did she feel dizzy? Xianxia seriously considered all the possibilities. Suddenly, a thought flashed through Xianxia's mind. It wasn't the first time Qin Ruoying felt dizzy. Whenever this happened, it must be when the tide of spiritual energy was surging. Was it because of the tide of spiritual energy? It obviously wasn't. The spiritual energy of heaven and earth was always the most important thing to cultivators, so how could it cause discomfort? Since natural factors were ruled out, only man-made factors were left. In addition to the information he had obtained on Daiyu Island, Xianxia could almost conclude that this definitely had something to do with the sky-bearing technique and the floating dawn mirror. If he guessed correctly, such a huge tide of spiritual energy had appeared on Earth, so the people behind the Divine Gate wanted to use it to open the Divine Gate. But because he had already destroyed the 5 holy temples, the Divine Gate hadn't been opened. The Divine Gate, the holy temples, the tide of spiritual energy, Si Ming Xian knew, the sky-bearing technique and the floating dawn mirror, everything was actually closely related. Just as Xianxia was pondering the root of the problem, Qin Ruoying seemed to have suddenly seen something. She looked up at the sky and muttered, I see it. There are people in the sky. They want to come down." As soon as she finished speaking, her body went limp and she completely fainted. Yingying. The sudden change really shocked Xianxia. He almost instantly carried Qin Ruoying back to the west wing. Looking at the unconscious Qin Ruoying lying on the bed, Xianxia's mood fell to the bottom. At this moment, Qin Xueqing also rushed into the west wing. Then she said to Xianxia with a pained expression, "I saw someone holding a mirror, and then he kept talking to the mirror. I could hear his voice, but I couldn't hear what he was saying at all." Qin Xueqing's expression was very pained. She looked like she was drunk, and she was trembling as she walked. "Mirror?" Xianxia repeated this word. When he was about to ask, Qin Xueqing shook her head and muttered, "I can't, my head is so dizzy. Let me sleep for a while." After saying that, she fell on the bed and lay side by side with Qin Ruoying. Looking at the two sisters who had fainted on the bed, Xianxia was silent. He carefully checked the physical condition of the two and found that their physiological functions were all normal. There were no signs of disorder in the vital essence in their bodies. It was as if they were sleeping peacefully. After a long while, when Xianxia was sure that the two of them were not in any danger, he gently kissed Qin Ruoying's forehead. Then he got up and walked out of the west wing. It was still raining heavily outside. The three little guys were still jumping excitedly in the rain. Xianxia subconsciously glanced in the direction of the main hall, but just happened to meet Qin Yongyan's gaze. Obviously, his father-in-law also noticed something strange. But due to his limited ability, he could only put all his hopes on Xianxia. Xianxia nodded slightly at Qin Yongyan. Then Chapter 365. Above the sky, amidst the dark clouds, Xianxia silently sensed all the tiny movements around him. A massive spirit energy tide that he had never seen or heard of before was surging wantonly in front of his eyes. It was only at this moment that Xianxia suddenly realized the area covered by this rain was too large. If one stood on the moon and looked at the earth, they could clearly see the entire northeastern hemisphere was shrouded in huge cloud cyclones one after another. From the Malay archipelago in the south to Siberia in the north, almost half of Asia was covered by these huge cloud cyclones. The center of each cyclone was the place with the densest spirit energy. At a rough count, there were at least 7 or 8 cyclones. There was one in Shangjing, one in Qinling, one in Donghai, one in Karakoram, one in Taklamakan. Everywhere that had appeared before, a spirit energy tide appeared at the same time today. In other words, if the divine gate suddenly opened, it would definitely appear in these places. Usually, it would come one by one, but today, so many appeared at the same time. What was the secret behind it? Xianxia didn't know, and he was too lazy to think about it. Because at this moment, there was only one thought left in his mind, and that was, completely block the divine gate. For Ying, for Nianyan, for their family of 3 to live a happy and stable life. Since opening the divine gate required a huge amount of spirit energy, then he wanted the spirit energy tide to never appear. From now on, he would be the dragon-breaking stone that stood between the two worlds. Wherever the spirit energy tide appeared, he would definitely be there. He wanted to completely cut off any connection between the two worlds. Disperse! This rain was not accompanied by lightning or thunder, but after Xianxia roared at the sky, a series of deafening rolling thunders suddenly sounded in the sky. Boom! In an instant, the sky was like an army of thousands of soldiers and horses facing the enemy. The sound of drums was endless and rumbling. With Xianxia as the center, a cyclone began to expand rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. Because it was spinning too fast, there were even white stripes visible to the naked eye on the inner wall of the cyclone. These stripes were like sharp blades, forming a meat grinder, enough to tear anything caught in the cyclone into pieces. The sky wailed, and the dark clouds roared in anger. Accompanied by the incessant flashes of lightning and rumbles of thunder, Xianxia was like a black hole, pulling in all the clouds and cyclones in the world and sucking them in bit by bit. This was the true power of the divine transformation stage. When Xianxia went all out, he could affect every corner of this planet. At this moment, he was like a Taotai from ancient times. He opened his mouth and crazily devoured the spiritual energy of heaven and earth on earth. Because only in this way could he immediately calm down the raging tide of spiritual energy. Unfortunately, Xianxia had overestimated himself. After all, Earth was no longer the dead planet of the last days that didn't even have a celestial being. After tens of thousands of years of silence, this decaying cultivation planet finally glowed with new vitality. The tide of spiritual energy was the beginning of everything. This was not something that Xianxia could stop by himself. Under the wheels of the Great Era, he was like a mantis that stretched out its arms to stop the car from moving forward. Even if he had to die, he would not hesitate. Ah! After Xianxia let out a long roar, a huge figure suddenly appeared behind him. It was the Dharma form. It looked just like him, but its body was more than 20 meters tall. It stood proudly in the sky like a god. Surging spiritual energy continued to surge into his body. Xianxia was like a balloon that was constantly inflating. There would be a time when he could not bear it anymore. Therefore, he urgently needed a channel to vent. This world, unsurprisingly, it became the channel for him to vent. In the blink of an eye, countless sword lights shot out, targeting the center of the cyclones one after another. Boom! Boom! Wherever the sword auras went, there would be a thunderous explosion in the air. For a moment, more than half of Asia was filled with earth-shattering thunder. Boom! Boom! The sword auras covered 30,000 miles, and one sword aura chilled 19 continents. If the heavens were in my way, I would smash the heavens. If the earth was in my way, I would flatten the earth. Xianxia crazily grasped the spiritual energy of heaven and earth while constantly detonating the center of the cyclones with the sword auras, trying to stop the tide from surging at the root. A big ship sank because of a small hole. 100 feet dike collapsed because of an ant's nest. The method Xianxia used seemed violent, but in fact, it was simple and effective. After his desperate series of attacks, the surging tide of spiritual energy was forcibly contained by him. The tide gradually receded, and the clouds and cyclones dissipated one by one. The dark clouds in the sky also dispersed, and the warm sun shone on the earth again. At this time, Xianxia's pale face showed a smile with difficulty. It was finally calm. However, just as Xianxia dragged his tired body and was about to return to Shangjing, a voice full of anger suddenly rang in his ears. "It's you. How dare you destroy the sacred ancestors' foundation? You're blocking my way to Tiandu. Hateful, hateful, hateful." This person's tone was filled with incomparable resentment, as if he had a grudge against Xianxia for killing his father and stealing his wife. In the 3 hateful words in a row, there was an undisguised killing intent. This enmity was absolutely irreconcilable. After hearing this voice, Xianxia was a little confused for a moment. Because this voice came out of nowhere, intermittent, and sounded a little strange, as if a voice changer was turned on, causing the voice to be distorted. However, Xianxia still understood this person's words. In this regard, Xianxia was unexpectedly mischievous. He imitated Fang Tangjing in the 9th grade Sesame official and shouted towards the sky with a cheeky face. Not satisfied? "Come and hit me, come and hit me." As he spoke, he twisted and turned in the air proudly. In fact, Xianxia wasn't sure if the other party could hear his ridicule. Since the other party couldn't pass through the void and directly pressed him to the ground and beat him up, then this person definitely couldn't be the Taiqing sacred ancestor. This person's cultivation was probably about the same as his, but the other party had touched the threshold of the word void, so he could directly talk to him from the great world. "You little thief! I'm so angry. Today, I swear that when the generals of Tiandu return, it will be the time to tear you into pieces. Remember this." Hearing this, Xianxia laughed disdainfully. Immediately after, he acted out of character and directly raised his middle finger towards the sky. At the same time, he didn't forget to ridicule. "Remember this, Mayas." Obviously, that person was so angry that he couldn't speak, so he could only let out a roar of anger and helplessness. However, at this moment, the last cloud cyclone completely dissipated. The tide of spirit qi receded. That person's voice stopped abruptly, as if it had never appeared. Everything returned to silence. Xianxia immediately withdrew the smile on his face. Chapter 366. This sudden thunderstorm also cooled down the excitement of the National Day celebration. As soon as Xianxia stepped through the Chuehua gate, the little fellow, who was playing hide-and-seek with the 2 brothers in the yard, focused on him. Then, the little thing's eyes immediately lit up. "Papa, where did you go?" As she spoke, she ran excitedly to Xianxia. The cute way she ran looked like a puppy at home. When she saw her owner come back, she would enthusiastically rush up and wag her tail. Of course, Nian was not a puppy. She was the most precious treasure in the world. Papa just went out because he had something to do. How was it? Did you have fun? I like the rain. It's fun. What's fun? Look at your clothes. They're soaking wet. Don't you feel cold? Hearing this, the little thing immediately shook her head like a rattledrum, and then said with certainty, "Not cold." "You're really not cold?" "Not cold." Looking at the little fellow's resolute look, it seemed that she really did not feel cold. However, as soon as the little fellow's voice fell, a cold wind suddenly blew over from nowhere. Her clothes were already a little wet, and after being blown by the cold wind, she could not help but shiver. Well, now she knew it was cold. The little fellow subconsciously pressed her body close to Xianxi's chest, and then could not help but whisper, "It seems a little cold. It's good that you know it's cold. Don't play outside for too long when it rains, or the cold air will get into your body and make you sick. If you get sick, you have to take very bitter medicine. Do you understand?" Understood. The little fellow had not taken medicine for a long time. But when Xianxia mentioned the word, medicine, she immediately recalled the bitter feeling, and her little nose wrinkled. "Let's go take a shower and change clothes." After the purpose of educating was achieved, Xianxia held the little fellow and called the two brothers to follow him into the west wing. As soon as she entered the door, the little fellow saw Qin Ruoying and Qin Xueqing lying on the bed, so she immediately warned them in a low voice, "Shh. Mama is sleeping. Don't disturb her." "All right." The two brothers nodded in unison, then tiptoed into the bathroom. After all, Nian was a girl. Xianxia naturally couldn't let her take a bath with the two brothers, so he had to wash the two brothers first before it was the little fellow's turn. Although Xianxi's mood wasn't very good at the moment, but when facing the three children, he still showed enough patience. Even though the two brothers were very naughty when they were bathing, Xianxia did not vent his anger on them. Children were always carefree. No matter what the situation was, happiness would always be the first thing in their hearts. Therefore, more than half an hour had passed by the time Xianxia helped the three little fellows wash up, and their clothes were dried by Xianxia with Xianxia. "Okay, go out and play. Wait, what do you want to eat tonight? Dad will make it for you later." "Braised pork ribs." After casually throwing out such a sentence, the little fellow hurriedly ran out of the west wing. "Okay, got it." After Xianxia responded with a smile, he slowly walked to Qin Ruoying's side. Looking at his lover lying quietly on the bed, Xianxia couldn't help but gently leave a kiss on her forehead. After a kiss, the sister-in-law next to him suddenly made a soft moan, as if she had a nightmare. Xianxia was about to reach out to check the situation, but Qin Xueqing jumped up from the bed like a frightened cheetah, and then kicked Xianxi's head. "Stop. It's me." In front of Xianxia, the sister-in-law would never have any possibility of resistance. He just casually glared at Qin Xueqing, and Qin Xueqing suddenly fell on the bed like a robot without power. "Let's talk. What did you see before you fainted?" The sister-in-law was a celestial being, and her foundation was much thicker than Qin Ruoying's, so the information she provided was naturally more useful. After Qin Xueqing was pressed on the bed by Xianxia, she was completely awake. The sister-in-law twisted her body and found that she couldn't move, so she couldn't help but blush and scold Xianxia, "Hey, let go of me." "But this don't. Why does it sound a little strange?" "Get up. Do you want to drink water?" "No." Qin Xueqing seemed to dislike the feeling of being controlled by Xianxia, so her attitude wasn't very good after she got up. But when she saw Qin Ring, the expression on her face slightly stiffened. Then Qin Xueqing quickly shifted her gaze to the window and then said, "I saw a lot of people. Those people seemed to be walking on clouds and flying in the sky, and they were wearing very strange clothes, a bit like ancient people. Behind them was a very, very big palace, even bigger than the Forbidden City. They were all looking at me. Maybe they weren't looking at me. Anyway, from my point of view, they were looking at me. I saw the hostility in their eyes, and the murderous intent. I don't know how to describe that feeling to you. At that moment, I felt like Sun Wukong, who wreaked havoc in heaven, standing outside the southern heavenly gate, facing the gods and Buddhas in the sky alone." Qin Xueqing frowned, trying hard to recall the scene she saw at that time. When Xianxia heard this last sentence, the corner of his mouth suddenly hooked up into a shallow arc, They weren't looking at you, they were looking at me. Looking at you? Why would they look at you? After hearing Qin Shi's words, Qin Shueqing shifted her gaze to him. She was really confused now, and really didn't understand the situation. Why did she suddenly faint? The people she saw in the dream, who exactly were they? His sister-in-law was confused, but Qin Shi had no intention of explaining. He leaned over and touched Qin Ruing's cheek, then immediately got up and walked straight out of the door. I'm going out first. If she wakes up early, remember to tell her I'll be back soon. Qin Shueqing felt that something was wrong with Qin Shi, and suddenly couldn't help but blurt out, "Wait, where are you going?" Qin Shi stopped in his tracks. Qin Shueqing looked at him, and then added in a slight panic, "You didn't even tell me where you were going. How can I tell my sister where you're going?" Seeing that his sister-in-law was so concerned, Qin Shi had to soften his tone, and smiled at her. "Don't worry, I'm just going to Daiyu Island to get something. I'll be back soon." Chapter 367. Daiyu Island. Heron Island, the pavilion in the middle of the lake. As the saying goes, the cicada senses the golden wind before it moves, sending the impermanence of death without knowing it. Ever since Jiang Jingqing was injured by that outsider who came out of nowhere, the sky above Daiyu Island seemed to be shrouded in thick dark clouds. Everyone in the clan was anxious, and the atmosphere was gloomy. Everyone seemed to be more cautious than usual. As the clan leader, Jiang Yuankue did not step forward to appease everyone at such a critical time. Instead, he stayed on Heron Island all day, doing something unknown. Everyone thought that the clan leader was planning something big, but no one knew Jiang Yuankue himself was confused. Apart from preserving the most complete inheritance, the Jiang clan also had an immortal old monster who had lived for thousands of years. Based on this alone, Daiyu Island was destined to have too many secrets that no one knew. The great ancestor's seniority was there. Once the old man spoke, Jiang Yuankue naturally had to bow and listen. The great ancestor's words were simple. He wanted him to wait outside the pavilion in the middle of the lake and wait patiently for the fated person to appear. The fated person? Who was the fated person? Who was the fated person? The great ancestor's words must have a deeper meaning, so Jiang Yuankue had been thinking about this question for the past few days. However, no matter how hard he thought about it, he could not come up with a reliable answer. Until this day, a sudden tide of spiritual energy enveloped the entire world. As the place with the densest spiritual energy within 100 miles, a cloud vortex inevitably appeared in the sky above Daiyu Island. This scene was very similar to the scene described in Immortals at the Magpie Bridge. When the golden wind and the jade do meet, it surpasses countless things in the human world. It was only at this moment that Jiang Yuankue suddenly realized the sky had changed. Sure enough, when sword rays streaked across the sky and shot toward the vortex from afar, Jiang Yuankue finally understood who the fated person the great ancestor was talking about was. In this world, there was actually someone who was unwilling to ascend to the great world, and was instead trying his best to stop the divine gate from opening, going against the entire great world with his own strength. What kind of courage was this? Even Jiang Yuankue could not help but be fascinated. However, Jiang Yuankue was the clan leader after all. He had to think carefully about everything. Therefore, in the next moment, a thought suddenly popped up in his mind. If the divine gate could not be opened, who was the biggest beneficiary? Weren't they the 5 lands of legacy? Even though the old ancestor had never explicitly mentioned it, Jiang Yuankue was keenly aware of the problem at this moment. When the spirit chi on Earth began to recover, what was the difference between Earth and the great world? The desert had already become an oasis, so why would the people need to migrate again? On Earth, they were the high and mighty Jiang clan. But in the great world, they were sinners who were as lowly as ants. Since that was the case, why was the Jiang clan still anxiously waiting for the gate of heaven to open? Isn't it good to stay on Earth? Thinking of this, Jiang Yuankue couldn't help but look back at the pavilion in the middle of the lake. His face suddenly revealed a complicated expression of worry and joy. Could it be the elder ancestor really had such a plan? Jiang Yuankue stood at the bridgehead, letting his imagination run wild. At this moment, a figure suddenly appeared in the sky above Daiyu Island. Following that, he passed through the formation at an extremely fast speed and landed outside the pavilion in the middle of the lake. Only when that person opened the door curtain and made a slight movement did Jiang Yuankue's heart suddenly tremble. He quickly turned around and angrily shouted, "Who is it? How dare you trespass into the forbidden area of my clan?" However, before he could step forward to stop him, the elder ancestor's voice slowly came from the house. "Yuankue, you can leave first." Hearing this, Jiang Yuankue couldn't help but stop. He quickly bowed and replied, "Yes. Also, pass on my order. Ring the 9-dragon bell and summon all the elders in the clan. I have something important to announce to everyone." 9-dragon bell? Hearing this, Jiang Yuankue subconsciously opened his eyes wide. He even suspected that he had heard wrongly. The elder ancestor seemed to have noticed his abnormality, so he spoke again to confirm it. "Go, ring the 9-dragon bell." "Yes, elder ancestor." This time, he finally heard it clearly. Therefore, Jiang Yuankue immediately went to the bell tower by the lake. After taking a deep breath, he was full of excitement. He pushed the hammer hard and rang the ancient bronze bell in front of him that hadn't been rung for thousands of years. Dong, dong, dong. The heavy and distant sound of the bell suddenly rang out, startling tens of thousands of birds on the island. Before the bell rang for the 9th time, the bridge outside the pavilion in the middle of the lake was already densely packed with people. Among these people, the ones with the lowest cultivation were diviners. Among them were Jiang Yuankue's father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and the various Jiang clan ancestors. It was obvious that they were the core strength of the Jiang clan. These people used to represent the glory of the Jiang clan, but now they were representing the future of the Jiang clan. With the continuous recovery of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, the shackles of heaven and earth had been completely broken. In this short 1 year, many diviners had appeared in the Jiang clan. Among them, there were even those above diviners led by Jiang Jingqing. The future had come, and it had arrived. The Jiang clan was like a ferocious beast entrenched on Daiyu Island. At this moment, it finally revealed its ferocious and terrifying true face. Among the people by the lake, Jiang Yuankue's seniority was the lowest. However, due to his status as the current patriarch, Jiang Yuankue was fortunate enough to stand in the first row of the bridge. The entire place was silent. One could hear a pin drop. Everyone lowered their heads and ears, quietly waiting for the old ancestor to speak. No one knew who the old ancestor was talking to, nor did they know the content of their conversation. In short, after a long, long time, the old ancestor's voice suddenly rang out, instantly shaking everyone's hearts. "I am Jiang Yan, the 17th generation patriarch of the Jiang clan. Today, I declare, the Jiang clan will form an alliance with Mr. Chen and fight against Tiandu together." In ancient times, what crime did the Jiang clan commit? But the divine ancestor, for his own selfish reasons, listed our Jiang clan as sinners and suffered the pain of being trapped for 10,000 years. However, there is no need for such a crime. Today, we will follow Mr. Chen to expel the heavenly gate and break off Tiandu's path of retreat in order to protect our homeland. This is to inherit the legacy of our ancestors. Where righteousness lies, all the clansmen of the Jiang clan should take this as their responsibility. Everyone knows this. This sudden declaration of war instantly stupefied all of the Jiang clan clansmen present. The old ancestor wanted to crusade against Tiandu? Didn't the clan often offer sacrifices and pray for Tiandu to open a door so that the clansmen could ascend to the great world? Why did he suddenly want to rebel and go against Tiandu with the banner of Tiandu? Perhaps because the news came too suddenly, everyone was unable to accept it for a while. Many hot-tempered clansmen risked disobeying the old ancestor and kept asking why in a loud voice. One had to know that the great world was the immortal world that everyone dreamed of. What was the purpose of a person's life? If it weren't for the limited conditions on Earth, how could they be trapped in the heavenly realm? Only by going to the great world would they have the possibility of continuing to break through. Only by going to the great world and improving their realm could they live for another 100, 200, or even 1,000 years. Everyone had long had enough of being unable to break through because of the shackles of heaven and earth. It wasn't that they couldn't do it, but that the conditions didn't allow it. And this was the fundamental reason why people felt sad. The crowd was restless. Everyone was questioning the old ancestors' decision. If it weren't for the fact that the direct descendants of Jiang Yuankue were still trying to appease everyone, many people would have already rushed into the pavilion in the middle of the lake and demanded an explanation from the old ancestor. Just when the situation was out of control, a figure suddenly lifted the curtain and slowly walked out of the pavilion in the middle of the lake. So annoying. A bunch of short-sighted people. Sorry, my friend got married the day before yesterday. His hometown is really too far away. It takes 5 hours by car. When he gets there, he has to help out in all kinds of ways. He's really exhausted. I started to sleep when I got home last night. I'm finally full of energy today. I hope everyone can forgive me. Chapter 369. The Adumbra Flower. Upon hearing these words, even Xianxia couldn't help but reveal an astonished expression. He really didn't expect that the Adumbra flower would exist on Earth. The words of the Adumbra flower were auspicious. It only appeared once every 3,000 years and was a heavenly flower that didn't exist in this world. But in reality, the Adumbra flower's seedlings weren't very rare. What was truly rare was its 3,000-year flowering period. A whole 3,000 years. One had to know that with Xianxia's current cultivation, he could barely live for 2,000 years. But this Adumbra flower needed 3,000 years of cultivation before it could fully mature and bloom. Just based on this growth period alone, it was destined that this strange flower would have extraordinary effects. According to the rumors in the pugilistic world, even if an ordinary person consumed this flower, he or she would be able to become an immortal and ascend to the heavens. He or she would immediately live as long as the heavens and the earth and be as old as the sun and moon. Of course, this was just an unreliable rumor. When Xianxia was in the heavenly spiral continent, he had heard that a mature Adumbra flower had appeared in the north. During that time, countless immortal cultivators rushed to the north almost every day in an attempt to obtain this flower. This flower was like a food shortage on an isolated island. Naturally, it would attract the attention of countless wild beasts. But there was only one Adumbra flower, but tens of thousands of immortal cultivators had participated in the fight for it. Naturally, a bloodbath had begun because of this. Countless people had paid the price with their lives. More than half of the north had become a living hell, a furnace of flesh and blood. So much so that even after this incident had died down, the words Adumbra flower could still cause people's expressions to change. With Xianxia's personality, he naturally didn't want to participate in this kind of fight. But this didn't mean that he wasn't interested in the Adumbra flower. If the ancient records were correct, this flower was a rare treasure. It had the miraculous effect of nourishing one's golden core and nourishing one's soul. If an ordinary person consumed it, they could even complete a transformation in an extremely short amount of time and condense a golden core. What kind of concept was this? A golden core. A lifespan of 500 years. If an ordinary person could directly advance to a golden core after consuming it, how powerful would its effects be if it was used as medicine, refined, and then given to immortal cultivators to consume? When he thought of this, Xianxia suddenly felt a sense of excitement. However, this feeling was not for himself, but for Qin Ring, who was still lying in bed. I don't accept this. At this moment, Jiang Fengyan was like a child who had been wronged. After being scolded by an adult, He wanted to escape from this place as far as possible. However, among the people present, the person with the lowest cultivation was a diviner. How could he tolerate such nonsense? Jiang Fengyan had probably thought of this as well. Therefore, while he was running, he grabbed the adumbra flower and stuffed it into his mouth. Since his father could not have it, then no one else could. He would die today. But unfortunately, after being struck by the old man in anger, all that was left of this place was a puddle of yellow soil and mud. It looked like an abandoned construction site on a rainy day. It was a messy scene. The scenery on Heron Island was picturesque. However, this scene was like a drop of ink accidentally spilled on a painting, completely destroying the beauty of the entire painting. This happened because of me. It's a pity for this forest. I don't want to ruin the beautiful scenery of the island because of this. Fine, then let it return to its original form. As he spoke, Xianxia raised his hands and made a gesture. Immediately after, a flower formed by the condensation of vital qi slowly bloomed in his palm. After Xianxia gently waved his hand, the glowing green flower flew straight to the ruins. The Jiang clan members present were somewhat confused. They had no idea what Xianxia was doing. The only thing they could confirm was everyone was quite dissatisfied with Xianxia's words and deeds. They only felt that he was taking advantage of the situation and saying useless words. To be honest, instead of wasting time here, he might as well get out of Daiyu Island as soon as possible. Out of sight, out of mind. Who didn't know how to say beautiful words? It was just a small forest. If it was destroyed, so be it. Did they need him to repair it? How was he going to repair it? He was just spouting nonsense. Because the elder ancestor had just flipped out, no one dared to directly express their dissatisfaction. They could only look at Xianxia with a rather strange expression. However, the next moment, something that caused everyone to be dumbstruck suddenly happened just like that. It was clearly early autumn, but Heron Island seemed to have ushered in the return of spring and the revival of all things. Green sprouts rapidly grew at a speed visible to the naked eye on the yellow soil and mud within a radius of a few hundred meters. Then, in the short span of a few breaths, these green sprouts grew into countless plants and flowers. Large trees were uprooted from the ground, and fresh flowers bloomed brilliantly. In an instant, fragrant grass covered the ground, and mountain flowers bloomed brilliantly. Although it was still a far cry from the lush greenery from before, it was no less than a miracle in everyone's eyes. Who present did not have the ability to destroy mountains and break rocks. However, it was undoubtedly a fantasy to ask them to revive all things and rejuvenate them. It was just like how humans had invented an unparalleled nuclear bomb but still had not found an effective way to cure cancer. Destruction was always easier than construction. As for them, clearly they were still far from it. After Xianxia showed off his skills, the Jiang clan members present finally understood why the elder ancestor was so friendly to this outsider. As the saying went, knowing someone by their reputation was not as good as meeting them in person. The Jiang clan members present finally had a deep understanding of the 3 words, Mr. Qin. Sir, you have great skills. This old man has learned something today. The old man praised from the bottom of his heart. After Xianxia heard that, he smiled and waved his hand. He replied nonchalantly, "All right, I won't say any more pleasantries. I'll visit you another day. Goodbye." As soon as she finished speaking, Xianxia suddenly disappeared under the watchful eyes of the crowd. After he left, many Jiang clan members seemed to have come back to their senses. They hurriedly looked around, trying to find his departing figure. Xianxia was also very satisfied with his performance just now. Therefore, on the way back to Shangjing, he was still recalling that feeling in his mind. Compared to when he made Qin Shan wear the red makeup, his current methods could be considered to be more skillful. In fact, it could be counted as a spell, but it could also be counted as not. because it included the use of vital essence and Xianxia's comprehension of the laws of heaven and earth. It was definitely not as simple as casting a spell. The laws of heaven and earth were a very mysterious thing. From the reincarnation of life and death, to the rotation of the sun and moon, to the rise of clouds and rosy clouds, to the blowing of the wind on the hills. Even if it was as small as gravel or dust, it contained a certain amount of the laws of heaven and earth. Just as the eminent monks often said, every sip and every bite was predetermined. There must be a reason for the Lanine silk fruit. This made Xianxia feel a little strange. After all, he usually did not cultivate at all. When he had time, he would accompany his wife and play with his children. Why did his comprehension of the laws of heaven and earth become deeper? Could it be this was the so-called cultivation in the secular world? Only by experiencing the secular world could one taste the various forms of life and enjoy the 7 emotions and 6 desires. Since Tianxian already had the 3 paths of heartless, unruffled, and heartless, then why couldn't he create a brand new emotional path based on his own experience? Benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom and trust, gentleness, respect, frugality, and tolerance. With the traditional virtues of Wuxia as the outline, he created his own path. Chapter 372. For ordinary people, National Day was still National Day, except that there was a rainstorm that didn't last long. It was sunny after the rain, and the autumn air was refreshing. It was a good time for sightseeing. With the rise of short videos, many cities in the southwest began to gradually become popular on the internet, which also diverted a lot of tourists from the old tourist cities. As the capital of a country, Shangjing had its own unique cultural heritage, so during the National Day holiday, the capital was still the first choice for people to travel in the country. The Great Wall, the Forbidden City, Tiananmen Square, Prince Gong's Mansion, Summer Palace, Hohai, almost all the famous scenic spots were crowded with tourists. As far as the eye could see, there was a dense mass of people at the back of their heads. It was truly crowded and bustling with noise and excitement. As for the annoying rain just now, obviously, it was completely forgotten by everyone. However, it was because of the heavy rain just now that Shangjing finally ushered in a good day with clear skies and clear winds. The sky was blue and the clouds were white. There was no trace of fog, and the sky was blue like the satin produced by the Jiangning weaving department. It looked particularly smooth and soft, and people couldn't help but want to reach out and touch it. If you add in the fresh and pleasant air, even the tourists who were complaining about the rain just now couldn't wait for another heavy rain like this tomorrow, so that they could enjoy the most complete classical beauty of Shangjing. All the scenic spots were lively, but the most unique old alley of Shangjing was still so quiet. Tourists in 2s and 3s stood in the alley taking photos. When they saw Xianxia directly open the door of the courtyard, they couldn't help but show a trace of envy in their eyes. The courtyard of Shangjing. It was very valuable. When Xianxia crossed the Chuihua gate with big and small bags, Qin Ruing had already woken up. Qin Xueqing accompanied her in the room and talked. Because Gu Lao hadn't seen Xianxia for a long time, he called Xiao Yuan to the kitchen to prepare dinner. The 3 little guys' activity level was seriously over the limit, so when Xianxia entered the door, he saw the 3 of them lying on the sofa watching cartoons attentively. This was their family's National Day. It was an ordinary National Day. The sister-in-law seemed to want to know what Xianxia was doing just now, so she couldn't help but ask a few times. However, she was fooled by Xianxia. Going to Daiyu Island was an official matter, but going home was a private matter. Public affairs and private affairs should not be mixed together. Xianxia had always been very clear about this. After the backbone returned, the Sihiyuan quickly became lively again, as if nothing had happened. Gu Lao was in charge of cooking, and Xianxia and Xiao Yuan were his assistants. Soon, a large table of delicacies was served. At this time, the shortcomings of the north had to be mentioned, and that was, the temperature difference between day and night was huge, and the sun set quickly. Just after 6 o'clock, the sky gradually darkened. When it was time to light the lanterns, the heavy rain had just stopped. Raindrops that had not yet dried up slowly rolled down from the leaves. Birds were looking out from under the eaves. The wind was cool, bringing with it the fragrance of the earth that came from nowhere. The little fellow looked up and saw a few stars blinking in the sky. "This song is so nice. Papa taught me. I learned it right away. It's very easy. Come, I'll teach you. Sing with me. The dark sky hangs low, and the bright stars follow. Insects fly, insects fly. Who are you thinking of?" In the brightly lit central room, the little fellow did not have stage fright in front of the big family. Instead, she clapped her hands and sang "Insects Fly" with her sweet voice. Although the brothers were a little embarrassed, they still plucked up the courage to sing with the little fellow under everyone's constant encouragement. The beautiful child's voice kept ringing in the room. For a moment, the big courtyard was a little more warm because of this. The 7-day holiday passed quickly. Xianxia also did as the little girl wished. In these few days, she took the two brothers to accompany her in Shangjing City to play to their heart's content. However, playing was one thing. When the holiday was over, she had to go to school. For this reason, the father and daughter held pinky hooks. Probably because she was in a good mood at that time, Xianxia also patted her chest and promised that she would go to kindergarten when school started. But, when it was the day of school, the little fellow stayed in bed and did not want to get up. Xianxia had no choice but to carry her to kindergarten. For this reason, Xianxia lost her temper. If she had not heard that the brothers had already gone to kindergarten, she would have been rolling on the ground. Then again, even adults had holiday syndrome, let alone a child who was only the size of a bean. Therefore, Xianxia could understand Xianxia's feelings. However, considering that the child was growing up day by day, preschool education was really important. Therefore, Xianxia could only bear the pain and play the role of a strict father for once. After all, this time, he could not give up halfway like before, right? When the father and daughter arrived at the school, there were already many parents sitting in the classroom with their children. In fact, compared with other children, Xianxia's performance was already very good. At least she did not cry, right? When she found the two brothers in the classroom, the performance of the three little fellows was even more outstanding. Chapter 373. Mr. Qin, can I give you a ride? The man in front of him was Wang Junxing, who sat at the same table as Xianxia on the day Xianxia entered the school. Perhaps it was because of his age, but Wang Junxing always gave off a mature and steady vibe. It was what people often referred to as manliness. When this kind of man smiled, even as a man, he could not help but be captivated by his charm and seriously think about every word he said. This was the charm of a mature man and had nothing to do with gender. If an analogy was to be made, a mature man was like a bottle of aged wine. The moment the bottle was opened, the fragrance was enough to attract everyone's attention. Obviously, Wang Junxing wanted to use this opportunity to talk to Xianxia. But unfortunately, after Xianxia heard him, he waved his hand and smiled. "No need, my house is nearby. It's faster to take the small road back." After that, Xianxia did not even give Wang Junxing a chance to speak again. He turned around and walked along the sidewalk. "Brother Wang, who is this guy? Since he's so shameless, why don't I just go and have a chat with him?" Zhao Ziyu was sitting in the driver's seat. After seeing Xianxia leave, he suddenly felt like he was insulted. He almost got out of the car to teach Xianxia a lesson. Kidnap him and talk? Wang Junxing coldly interrupted him. Hearing this, Zhao Ziyu suddenly became like a frosted eggplant and completely withered. It was not difficult to see that the two of them were not ordinary friends. Instead, it was more like a superior and subordinate relationship. Didn't you always say that you have eyes and ears in Beijing? It's been more than a month. How come there is no reliable news at all? Didn't we already investigate to Zhonghai? We even found the household register for you. If you ask me, this guy is just a bumpkin. Brother Wang, why do you care so much about him? How can a bumpkin get a kid into this school? Wang Junxing casually asked a rhetorical question and directly made Zhao Ziyu speechless. Actually, thinking about it, it made sense. Even though it was just a small kindergarten, the water inside was deep. From the first day the children stepped into this kindergarten, regardless of their future academic performance, they would definitely follow the pre-planned path all the way forward. They would go through childhood, primary, junior, high, and finally plunge into the top schools in the country, such as Qing, Bei, Rinlaw, and so on. The only possible fork in the road was the choice between politics and business. Those in business could choose to study abroad, while those in politics had to stay in the country to further their studies. This was indeed the case. While the bumpkins were still warming up at the starting line, others were already drinking champagne and celebrating at the finish line. However, this was not to say that society was unfair. Chapter 374. The celestial beings were out hunting, patrolling the heavens. Ever since Emperor Qin burned the books and buried the scholars, such a grand event had not happened in the Divine Land for a long time. Daiyu Island's magical formation was activated. Over 300 celestial beings rushed valiantly toward the center of the tide, facing the rolling black clouds, flashing lightning and rolling thunder. This moment was destined to be recorded in the annals of the Jiang clan. Because from this day on, the Jiang clan was no longer a clan of sinners abandoned by the divine ancestor. Under the leadership of the old ancestor, they would compose an epic that belonged to the Jiang clan in this divine great land that was once again filled with vitality. In fact, after the great ancestor made this decision, everyone knew what they were going to face. But at the same time, they also understood one thing, and that was, the strong often rose from humble beginnings. In front of the great world, the overall strength of Daiyu Island was as insignificant as an ant. It could be said that any divine general from the Heavenly Gate had the ability to massacre the entire Daiyu Island. After all, 300 celestial beings sounded like a lot, but they were only 300 pseudo-core immortal cultivators. They had not even truly condensed their Jindan. Of course, if these 300 celestial beings formed a formation and attacked and retreated together, even a divine general would not dare to face them head-on. However, this was only a theoretical concept. Because a divine general was not a wooden dummy. He only needed to employ guerrilla tactics. Through constant harassment, sneak attacks, and ambushes, how long would it take for him to kill 300 celestial beings? The gap between the two realms was simply too big. 1 against 100, 1 against 1,000. This was what an immortal cultivator should be capable of. If it had been in the past, the Jiang clan would definitely not have the delusion of going against the great world. They were just a lowly clan of sinners. When the spiritual energy was exhausted, they were like sand lizards wandering in the desert. They could only rely on eating maggots and rotten meat to sustain their lives. But suddenly, times had changed. With the continuous recovery of spiritual energy, the desert gradually became an oasis. Looking at the jackals, wolves, tigers, and leopards swarming toward the oasis, the sand lizards hesitated. Should they continue to live lowly, or should they stand up straight and fight the jackals, wolves, tigers, and leopards to protect the oasis that originally belonged to them? If he took a gamble, he might end up enraging the ferocious beast, and in the end, he would end up without a corpse. Then he could continue to hide in the soil for the rest of his life, eating maggots and rotting meat. Thank goodness. The Jiang clan still retained the last trace of bravery. So, even if they had to take the risk of their entire clan being annihilated, the Jiang clan still had to fight for that beautiful future under the lead of the old ancestor. Perhaps even the old ancestor didn't realize, their present conduct is a perfect reflection of the famous saying, natural selection, survival of the fittest. Compete with the heavens, compete with the earth, and compete with people. Competition was the unchanging truth in the hearts of the immortal cultivators. To Qin Shi, defeating the spirit Qi tide was just a small matter with a casual swing of his sword. But to the Jiang clan, this was a huge matter that could only be barely accomplished if they went all out. The center of the tide was not far from Daiyu Island. Under Jiang Yuankui's guidance, the Jiang clan's celestials soon arrived at their destination, on a vast and boundless ocean. Because they moved quickly, they were fortunate enough to witness the occurrence of the heavenly anomaly. They saw a waterspout suddenly rising from the surface of the ocean. In just a short moment, the waterspout had already risen to the clouds and was tightly connected with the thunderclouds in the sky. From afar, the waterspout was like a pillar supporting the heavens and the earth by itself. Everyone was stunned. After all, this was the first time they witnessed a heavenly anomaly with their own eyes. In front of such a huge natural phenomenon, the 300-plus people were simply as insignificant as a speck of dust. Boom! Boom! Coupled with the deafening sound of thunder in the sky from time to time, many people started to have thoughts of retreating. The old ancestor wanted them to go against the heavens, faced with such a violent natural phenomenon, not to mention the others. Even the leader, Jiang Yuankui, couldn't help but frown. However, just as everyone was hesitating, a figure suddenly plunged into the waterspout in front of him and then laughed out loud. A bunch of trash. A mere waterspout scared you all? Didn't you guys always want to know how I broke through? Then you all better watch carefully. The person who spoke was Jiang Jingqing, who had been beaten into the ground by Xianxia a few days ago. After this period of recuperation, Jiang Jingqing's injuries had finally healed by 70 to 80%. He didn't expect that as soon as he appeared today, his wild and unruly nature would once again appear. Actually, among all the people present, Jiang Jingqing's talent wasn't the most outstanding, but he was the first Jiang clan member to step into the heavenly man realm. Therefore, everyone had always been curious as to how he had comprehended the key to it. However, curiosity was just curiosity. Due to Jiang Jingqing's annoying personality, no one had specifically asked him for advice. Who would have thought that he would actually take the initiative to say it today? In fact, how could Jiang Jingqing be talented? He must have a screw loose in his head. When a normal person saw such a shocking heavenly anomaly, their first reaction would definitely be to avoid it. However, Jiang Jingqing insisted on doing the opposite. No matter what kind of heavenly anomaly it was, he wanted to use this opportunity to train himself. His breakthrough stemmed from the spiritual energy tide that had appeared last time. It was just like how Yang Gui used the black iron heavy sword to practice swordsmanship under the waterfall, increasing his strength through resisting the waterfall. When the spiritual energy tide appeared last time, Jiang Jingqing just happened to be cultivating nearby. He felt that the spiritual energy in the center of the whirlpool was especially turbulent, so he dived in without thinking and stepped into the heavenly man realm in one go. There was definitely danger. After all, the spiritual energy in the center of the whirlpool was far superior to the outside world. If one's cultivation was insufficient or had an unstable foundation, they might suffer from chi deviation if they weren't careful. They might even explode and die because they couldn't withstand the enormous spiritual energy. However, for a cultivator like Jiang Jingqing who had been trapped in the heavenly man realm for many years due to the exhaustion of spiritual energy, how could this be dangerous? This was simply a great opportunity. Because his foundation had been tempered thousands of times, as long as there was enough spiritual energy of heaven and earth, he could condense a true golden core. In the past, the heavenly gate would always open with the spiritual energy tide. Everyone wanted to ascend to the great world through the heavenly gate, so they didn't realize at all, even if they didn't pass through the heavenly gate, they could use this opportunity to break through to the heavenly man realm. Therefore, with Jiang Jingqing as an example, everyone carefully flew into the center of the whirlpool. If the spiritual energy tide was compared to a cake, then Xianxia used brute force to smash the cake into mud with one slap. You're tuning in to the Wandering Hero YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.